Hello, everybody. Welcome to the XPlicit Materia Podcast. It's been a while. We are here. We're finally here. We're actually doing another episode, which is great. This is actually a special podcast because I have with me none other than Sleepezi, the creator of the most thorough and expansive theory videos for Final Fantasy Remake that I have ever seen. And if you haven't watched them, you might want to get a notepad, a popcorn, some soda, and you're going to have to sit down and relax. But because they span multiple hours and there's multiple parts, but I guarantee you, once you hit play, you're going to be glued right to the video, and you're never going to stop watching. You're just going to want to hear more and more and more. And it's also special because this is the first time in the podcast history that we actually asked future viewers to submit questions for Owen here, and we're going to get to those a little bit later in the podcast. But for right now, I just want to thank you, Owen, for being on this podcast, because I'm pretty sure since your channel has kind of exploded since your first videos that you've gotten offers to do stuff like this. So I'm grateful that you're coming on my podcast and we get to nerd out to Final Fantasy VII and just talk. It's cool. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. This is super awesome and absolutely a pleasure. I checked out a lot of your stuff and I was like, this guy just seems like a really nice guy to just sit back, relax, and maybe not go too big brain here. We're going to try and keep it interesting, but we'll see. We'll see what we get into. But thank you for having me.
Yeah, dude. I'll tell you this right now. I'm not so much for big brain. I wouldn't say I qualify for you or Max Dude's level of rabbit hole, but I do enjoy it. I do enjoy video games, and I like to talk about them and like to nerd out, even though I don't feel like I'm worthy. But you know what? I'm worthy.
Everybody's
today.
Worthy.
Everyone's worthy.
We're all in it together at this point. So
Right. Yeah, that's right. Damn right. First, before we get into your videos and stuff, the PS5 live event just happened.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
I'm really excited to install my $600 router. That's what I'm really excited. I was actually pleasantly surprised. I was just watching, hoping that there would be some Final Fantasy 16 news or some remake news, but I got a lot of other stuff out of it that I'm actually pleasantly surprised. They blew the Xbox event out of the water.
Yeah, I think, all they really had to do is hey, we're actually going to show how you play the game. This is actually how you play the game, not cinematic trailers.
Exactly.
Which there was a lot of
gameplay. Yeah.
There was a lot of cinematic trailers, but what else they're going to show? It's
Did you see anything that you were interested in playing?
Other than Horizon, it's not Zero Dawn, but Horizon and Spider-Man, of course.
Right. Miles Morales.
I think Spider-Man for PS4 is probably one of the best games I've ever played.
I'm actually completely outside of that bubble. I think the last Spider-Man game I played was the PS2 one.
Oh yeah,
I can't even remember which. I think that's just Spider-Man 2 based off of the movie.
Dude, the Spider-Man for PS4 is just it. When I played it, I like to tell this to my friends when I'm explaining Spider-Man to them if they hadn't played it. It's look, for years they've been trying to make a superhero video game for years, and they finally did it. You actually feel like you're Spider-Man when you're playing Spider-Man PS4. It's incredible. It truly is.
And also just with the new graphical capabilities of the PS5 and the loading times, that all, even though I haven't had the biggest inclination to play the game, I'm just super impressed. It's super cool to be able to swing through a city, and now load times apparently aren't a factor, so faster, better.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see how much improved the loading times really are, because you won't really know until you actually see someone play the game like on a live floor, like a regular
Right.
event, when you have a guy, it's like, and this is me playing the game and me, and I'm going to go over this cliff and then I'm going to go notice how there's no loading screens. And you're like, oh, I didn't notice that. Oh, that's
Right. There could be some magic tomfoolery happening in the background. Yeah.
right. Exactly.
Definitely good to have like a good sense of like, I guess, not to be hesitant, but just until you get your hands on it, it's always hard to buy into like any sort of tech demo or anything like that. Even like the Unreal 5 one, like it was just so impressive, but also just coming from playing so many other games, it's always hard to believe,
Right.
until
Right.
you're actually sitting there playing it. And my brother was talking about the haptic feedback that they mentioned in the PS5. And I don't have like a phone that has haptic feedback or anything like that, but he was like, that's going to be huge. And I was like, I can't imagine what that's going to be like until I'm actually holding the controller. So
Right.
but I am excited. Like all the stuff they showed was super, like, first of all games, which
Yeah.
for the most part was not what I was expecting. I was expecting like a price tag and then like some big, which ended up happening, but like maybe like 3 reveals, but now, yeah, like Resident Evil 8, which I'm super stoked for. I'm a huge Resident Evil fan. It was actually like, not to segue too far away from it, but it's actually one of the Resident Evil 7 was one of the first videos that I wanted to make about when it was in the teaser phase, because there was so much mystery to the teaser of 7 that I don't know what it was, but just the mystery surrounding the game, like how it was played and like unlocking like things in the past through like the VHS tapes. All of that for me was like so cool and interesting that I actually was like really interested in trying to figure out like the story of that game before it came out. Obviously that never happened, but it's definitely like one of those inspirational games. And also like for a horror genre, it's touched on like, the tank control sort of fixed camera angles. And now it's like back to first person.
Yeah. There's a lot of first person games that are coming out, and I have my own opinions on first person that is not very popular. So we're not going to go there. We're just going to.
Are you talking about like first person shooters, or are we talking about?
I'm talking about just the actual perspective. If you guys want to know, if everyone wants to know,
I want to know.
Okay, so I released was one of my first videos on like WiseDrums opinions. And it was right when Cyberpunk 27 was released, or the trailer was released, and they said, hey, it's going to be mostly first person, and everyone got all upset, and I was one of those people. And, when things like that happen, you get people attacking each other, saying you're stupid, you're a baby, this, that, and the other. And so I made a video that was kind of like, look, we are being kind of little babies, just a little bit, because we're kind of upset that it's going to be mostly first person. But there are valid reasons why someone would be upset, and then there you go. My issue with first person, the perspective in general, is it doesn't immerse me as much as it immerses someone else. And for me, it's like it's not truly immersive for me, because when you're looking through your eyes, it's not just you're looking through your eyes. There's a bunch of other senses that are in play, like peripheral vision, for example. You can't really get peripheral vision unless you have, maybe if you have like those screens that kind of span out like this around you, and so you kind of have peripheral vision, but still it's kind of fake. And so that's just an example of why like it doesn't
it's not as immersive
click.
as you'd kind of like think it would be.
Right.
I'm kind of on the same page. Like, I mean, for shooters, like I think that's fine, but I'm also fine with like third person too. That Ghostwire game that got shown was in first person, and that felt super weird. I was not that was the only, like, other than the Demon Souls announcement, which I might want to get into later, but because that game looks super weird compared to the original, which is super strange, but I digress. The Ghostwire thing, I was like, oh, this looks like it's going to be creepy, and then all of a sudden, like, the tone shift of like the trailer to gameplay, I was like, you're like throwing up hand symbols and stuff like that, and like dispelling ghosts, and it's super colorful all of a sudden. I'm like,
I don't know. It kind of reminded me of those like fake martial artists that do the, you know,
exactly.
And then the person flies back and you don't even hit them.
It's like Matrix.
Yeah.
Like, just a single punch, like sending somebody flying. But that was the only time I've seen like the first person genre, or I guess the choice of first person, where I was just like, you know what, that looks weird. And I was not expecting that, but I would be interested to see what this is like.
Right.
But I wouldn't say it more immersive because it honestly just looked kind of odd, but I'm totally down for odd. So
yeah. Everyone. I also make another video. It's just like, gamers play games for all sorts of reasons. Mm-hmm. It doesn't, and it doesn't really matter, how you play it, but that you play in the first place, and it just brings us together. Come on.
Exactly. As long as you're enjoying the game. There's another like an odd example of like a first person game, and it's actually like one of my favorite games of like all time. I haven't played it recently, but like I just remember it very fondly. It was this Dreamcast game called Mach X, and it's super weird. First of all, I'm gonna go right out and say it is that I don't think anybody would like to play this game. But as a kid, it was like, you get one game and then you kind of play it to death regardless of quality. But I ended up enjoying it. But it was a first person like sword fighting game, and very Japanese, like very like all over the place stylistically. But like I didn't really think about the first person. It was just like, oh, this is just a fun game. Wouldn't even say it's that immersive. But oddly enough, that game has a really cool mechanic, and I'm actually upset that this mechanic hasn't been implemented in other games, but I think it probably has here and there. But every time you would beat a boss, you could choose to switch out the body that you're using for the boss's body. So like all of their weapon set like would become yours. And if you wanted to get your other body back, you would just go to the area that you traded bodies and then switch back. It's so weird.
That's really weird.
Yeah, there's like
that sounds very Kojima-esque.
It is actually totally very like surreal, and like just a lot to do with that concept. And oddly enough, they ended up re-releasing it on PS2 with a third-person perspective. So I guess they didn't really think it was that good the way that it was made. But
hey, okay. Let's talk about why you're here. Let's go ahead. Let's go for it.
We don't want to make this 3 hours, right?
I know. Yeah. Okay. So first of all, I just want to say congratulations on the reception your videos are getting, because it's much deserved. You put so much work into them. It's very obvious, and your video editing skills are great too. Like
I appreciate that too.
You told me right when we were like testing out stuff that you kind of just downloaded Audacity and you're like, okay, I'm just going to make this video and just hope for the best.
Yeah, it was definitely, it was really odd. The reception has been crazy. First off, it's been crazy to see. The one thing I wasn't even really thinking about the comment section or anything like that, but like going into making like any video, especially on YouTube, I think coming from that world of watching a bunch of YouTube, you're kind of just aware of how people can be in comment sections. Mm-hmm. And I was expecting not a lot, but when I just saw how many people were in support of what I was saying, it was just mind-blowing. So like, yeah, the rise has been really interesting. It's been really fast, but I'm super grateful to just have like so many people be so supportive of the videos so quickly. I wasn't expecting that at all.
Yeah,
a lot of theory crafting too. So
yeah, man, like these things can go either way, man. When you put something out there, you're just like, well, here we go.
Yeah, you kind of just close your eyes and just walk into the wood chipper, and you're just like hoping that people will somewhat understand what you're saying. That was the biggest thing too, is that I had done some editing in like a long time ago. I literally haven't touched editing software for maybe like, I want to say like 5-6 years. So,
oh, wow.
I kept it around, obviously, but I had never had the inclination to go and use it recently. But and I know that you've watched it, but the Easy Allies podcast has a lot to say about like that Final Fantasy VII Remake subject, especially because Max was kind of like the voice of the community at that point, or at least the one that I was a part of, like kind of spelling out certain things that he had noticed and then really got into it on that podcast, that was kind of where I was like, okay, I get what he's saying, and then the ending's already crazy as it is, but to be able to pull that much out of just such a small section of the game was interesting to me, but also it was hard to make sense of, which was, and this is the first time this has happened to me in like a really long time, but I just felt kind of like really driven to just start writing about this subject of remakes ending, and not the time travel, but just like making sense of what it was. And I was like, I'm going to have to like dig in deep and like
and
really
you did.
And I hadn't played any of those games in so long, but I was like, okay, well, if it's a part of the compilation, then that's probably a good place to start. So once things just started going, I had like at least like 40 pages of notes for the first part. And I ended up cutting that out and putting some of it in the second part. And then I was like, I don't know how long this is going to be, but I'm going to film it. And I don't care how long it is. I'm just going to post it and see what happens. And now I'm in this situation talking to you about it, which is kind of mind blowing.
Dude, that's you know, I love hearing stories like that when someone is like inspired to do something. You're like, you know what? I'm just going to do it. I'm inspired. I want to put some of me out there. Yeah. And then, you know, again, just taking that plunge, and like, that's risky business, especially if it's controversial, if it's a controversial opinion, you know, and, or you, at least you think it could be. And you're just like, you're stuck in this like mode of like courage and fear, you know, you're just kind of like, okay, fucking all right, let's just do it. And then it just like explodes. Yeah. Especially about the ending. But like, so do you have a background in writing, like, or detective work? Do you have like a cork board? Like, I'd love to see your setup. Do you have like a cork board with the strings?
Ironically enough, I had a cork board up in my apartment like a year ago that I had to take down because it wasn't being used at all. But it was for that sort of stuff specifically. Yeah, I do have a background in writing a little bit. I actually came out, I'm in the California area, and I actually came out here to try and become a writer for children's television, like animation and stuff like that, because that's a big thing out in this part of the world. And it was just super interesting. I developed a couple of like pilots that never got actually developed, but that was when writing was actually a thing. I had never written in like college. I'd never written in high school. Like, I always enjoyed it, but there wasn't really like an inkling early on to ever start doing that. But yeah, it sort of started picking up. I also draw as well. So I figured that if I could develop art and also story, you know, stuff with like a script and stuff like that, that would make me able to kind of just make my own content without having to necessarily rely, because it's hard to find people to like partner up with, and like not to partner up, but just finding like a good partner in like certain projects. I find, especially like in film and like especially in college, like, you know, people are really driven to do their own idea, their own thing, but you really want to find somebody that's like a good bounce, like a good, like somebody who's just going to run with an idea and just see how, even if it's not a good idea, just see how far that idea can go. So I just decided at some point, like, and I've found people like that, luckily, like, and that's like been really awesome. But yeah, I started just thinking to myself, maybe I should get into like everything, jack of all trades sort of thing. So. And
then you started with Final Fantasy VII Remake, and look at you. I mean, I'm telling you, man, like the way that the thoroughness of your breakdowns, it's just like I could tell immediately when I'm listening, like this guy is intelligent in the way that you can piece together things. Like, I don't have that talent. I just don't. Like, I can look at something and be like, that's not right, but I don't know why that's not right. But you were able to, in your videos, just like, okay, this means something. What does this mean? They're showing us something. It's got to mean something in terms of like what they're hinting at. Right. And you took it and you ran with it. And as far as, you know, like starting out and then trying to find someone to partner with. It's like, dude, you're preaching to the choir, man. Like I started this whole YouTube channel because of that same thing where, I'm from, in the music world, that's where I started. And that's, like being in bands and having a sense of community. You guys have the same goal, when you're signed to a label, and, you are battling with the label a little bit sometimes if the relationship is adversarial at times, but that's just with any label. That's with any like boss, But anyway, you have this group mentality where, together we are strong.
Yes.
But then, when you go away from that, you realize like how lonely creating your own stuff can really be. So I think it's important to be a part of a community. And I think what you've done with your videos is you've joined, or you've grown a new leaf on top of the already blossoming community of Final Fantasy VII Remake fans.
Yeah, I definitely think that like I think one of the things that I thought about like right at the beginning was that this is kind of like a hot topic at the moment. Is the ending's divisive? People are kind of torn on it, and there's a lot to say about it. And I knew that there were people out there, like in the world, like me, who were just like looking for connections, and I had the time and to be able to like sort of put that out there. And because I knew there would be somebody out there who would be like looking for theory videos or things like that. And it's really awesome, even in like the comment section of like anywhere that I've posted the video, I like anytime I'm reading the comments, it's not just like let alone like massive support for like my own content, but everyone's like, you gave me this idea and I wanted to like, I started theory crafting on my own, which was kind of the point of the videos as well, is that I didn't want to make them too definitive.
Right.
In terms of like an opinion. Obviously I have a very strong opinion about where things are going at this point, especially, but just to see people being able to like watch the videos, take something from it for themselves, and then make their own idea has also just been like an entirely other scope of this that I didn't even really see coming. I knew that there were other theorists, but
right. Well, yeah, and I gotta say this too. Like, you kind of blossomed on Reddit. Like, you have like so many different comments of so many different people and so much support on Reddit. And I gotta tell you this right now, Reddit scares the shit out of me.
I didn't even know. I'm gonna let you know right now that I didn't even know how to operate Reddit.
I don't either.
Videos.
I have no idea.
My brother was like, like you should post your video there. And I was like, I don't even know how to make a post. I don't even know. Like this is like, I used to use forums, but like, and I guess it was kind of the same concept, but I was just so lost for literally like a day. I tried to post it.
I'm still lost. I mean, I now know like a little bit of it, like the rules, like each subreddit has its own rules and you got to follow them, to the T. And like, not only that, like the community of Reddit, it's not like Twitter where you get like stupid idiots just like saying, oh, this is fucking stupid, blah, blah, blah. And then they'll leave and you're like, okay, that was an idiot troll. But Reddit, from what I noticed, is like these people are freaking really intelligent and they have their own things to say and they're substantial. And if they don't agree with you, they're going to let you know, but they're not going to let you know in a dumb way. They're going to let you know and tear your theory apart.
Definitely, yes. Yes, and honestly, there's so many people. This is the other thing too. And just any comment, there's so many of these comments on these videos that are like pages, that they could literally be pages long.
Even the questions that we asked for is like, there's guys like asked like 7 different questions. Like, all right, dude, we asked for like one question.
I was so like, in the back of my mind, because we posted that, I posted that so late, I wasn't expecting to get as many as we did. But then when the people like right at the tail end started posting, I was like, you guys have a lot to say.
I mean, people do, man. I mean, and again, they're all great. They all have, great questions and great, again, there's substance to them. They really thought about this. But let's hang on. I did want to ask you this one question. Okay. Sure. So your first time playing the game. All right. You played Final Fantasy VII Remake. You finished the game for the first time. What were your immediate thoughts, like right after the game? Like, what did you think of the game after you were done playing it? You sit back and you're like, Okay, that was something.
That's kind of the reaction that I had. I like to kind of equate it to the way that I felt about the Force Awakens, the Star Wars movie,
Mhm.
the new trilogy, where it's like you kind of get swelled up into like the events that are happening, and everything's happening so fast, especially in the ending of Remake. There's just so much that is being thrown at you very quickly, where at the end of it, you kind of sit back, and because it's like this experience, let's say, you kind of have to process it. And it took me a long time to like really understand how I felt about it. I knew that I enjoyed what I played. Like I loved the combat. I didn't like the air combat, but I loved the combat. I loved what they were doing with it. I liked the fleshing out of the world. But then like that entire ending was like something that I felt very divisive about it, to be honest.
Mhm.
And probably is the reason why I started like really getting into all of this stuff. There was just something that I just didn't understand about the ending that made me either question, this could be either really bad, like this could set up for a potentially not very good series of games. And I've been burned like that before. Like
Right.
I'm a Kingdom Hearts fan. I've only played up till 2, and I did not care to wait 10 years for 3. I've abandoned that series. I hate to say that. I
will
might revisit it.
I will say Kingdom Hearts. I'm actually playing Kingdom Hearts 3 right now. Not like right now, but like, that's my current game that I'm playing. Yeah, off the side. Hey, yeah, what are you talking about? Okay. It's a lot of fun. It's a way more fun than one or two. And yeah, like I just got up to like the pirate level, and apparently, so you have there's so much game in that game now. In like the pirate level, you actually have another giant map, kind of like how you go on the gummy ship and you do all these maps or whatever. But in the pirate level, it's like you have your own ship that you got to level up. So now not only do you have the gummy ship, now you have a pirate ship. Then you got to travel all around the map. And I'm like, oh my God, there's like a whole other game within this game. This is kind of crazy and awesome. Anyway.
That's always kind of been like an interesting thing about like Kingdom Hearts is that they would kind of layer it with like all this other content inside of like each world. And that was always like super fun. I've heard a lot of criticisms about that. That like they're like cheaper kind of games inside of like the game, but I always thought it was a nice way to like kind of mix things up. But yeah, the story of that game and all of that was a little daunting. So when I got to the end of Final Fantasy VII Remake, I kind of had the same feeling where I was like, I don't know if I'm in the right hands or not anymore. And I kind of had to like figure that out. Obviously my opinion has completely changed. But my first impressions were a little rocky. Sure.
I actually did want to, that is actually another question I wanted to ask you, like, because there is a lot of criticism that's thrown, especially towards Nomura and his style of and handling of storytelling, Kingdom Hearts being a prime example. Right. Considering all of your research and all of your work with Remake, is there something that you've grown to appreciate about his direction that the critics are missing in a way, or that you were missing at one point?
I think something that I like, and I know it's not just him that's kind of steering all of this,
but that he gets all the hate,
right? And I would like to, like, there's a couple of things. So the first thing is that I think that he's a very like meta director. I think he has a very self-aware approach to, like, I mean, that's obvious in like the Whispers. A lot of people equated their presence as being like a representation of like the fan base or people who were, the old Final Fantasy VII lovers. Mm-hmm. I think, and also in I know about Kingdom Hearts 3 and the DLC ending. That also seems very meta. I think that approach is very interesting to take with something like that's been around for so long. But I would also like to point out that like his art direction has been a part of these games since the beginning. And one of the things that I look at the most when I'm looking at like theorizing is the art direction. Like, why is the character designed this way? Like, this is the same way that I found like the purple flower connection and the yellow flower connection is that it's a visual language that seems to be translated through the compilation to arrive at Remake. I look for a lot of visual cues. And I think that that's the strongest consistent element to the compilation and because he also designed like a lot of the characters in Dirge. He designed Minerva in Crisis Core. He designed like a whole bunch of stuff. So even if he wasn't directing it, I think in the back of his mind, he was like, you know what? I'm going to put this design here because it's kind of like a callback to this other thing that I made. And there's a huge amount of that I'm going to be talking about. I actually wanted to kind of talk about him directly in like one of these parts or just like as a separate video. But I think because he has that sort of eye for the visual is that he's kind of been telling the story visually since the beginning. And I think that's really coming to like a head here in Remake. And I'm almost 100% convinced that all of those elements are going to play into this on some level.
Well, you know what?
All of design choices.
It kind of reminds me of another director that's kind of famous for doing kind of the similar things, not as derided. Well, I don't know. J.J. Abrams is similar. You know, where he likes to throw in like tie-ins to even like other shows that he's doing. I remember when Cloverfield was coming out, and he had sprinkled in some stuff about, I feel like it was Lost or another show that he was doing, like Fringe or something. I like a completely different show on a totally another, like a network or something. And then, but he threw it in there for, you know, because like these worlds are like connected somehow. You just got to find out, and it's kind of exciting. Yeah, at least when Lost was out, like you had nothing but that. You had nothing but like you were like, look, characters were talking to one another, but you were glued to the background, and you're just kind of like, is there something there that I'm missing? You know, and before, you know, because Lost was interesting because it was right when the internet forums started to like become like a real thing, and you know, people
definitely took a head on that.
Yeah, and so it was fun to like theorize like where they are they dead, like what's going on, what does that statue mean, why are there polar bears on the island, you know, that kind of stuff. That it was kind of fun, and I feel like Nomura is kind of doing the similar things. Does that make does that make sense at all?
I think like especially talking about Cloverfield, there was like a whole online, and there's been movies before this. Actually, Blair Witch did this before Cloverfield ever did. They had an online presence before the movie even came out, and it was the same thing with Cloverfield. For those who don't know what this is, it was just like this shot on Handycam sort of monster movie. It was a really big thing, online marketing and like just like the mysterious marketing tactics.
Yes, it was super mysterious.
It was such a J.J. Abrams thing, and he definitely made that a bigger thing for like just the film industry in general. So just as like, I wouldn't say that the movie's like that great, but I would say that the way it's handled, and since like Cloverfield has also just become like its own franchise, like you can just see that sort of marketing tactic being used in every single thing that it's involved in. Yeah. Anyway, the point that I was trying to make is that, the sort of sprinkling in of these finer details has always seemed to be something that Nomura has done in his content. Like even in Kingdom Hearts, even though I didn't play all of the like sort of spin-off games, they weren't accessible to me at the time when they were being released. Nowadays you have like the bundle,
right?
Of all
I have
games.
the bundle. I actually, I just got the all-in-one package.
You and me both. I actually got it. I haven't played it yet, but it's cool that they remastered that and all that. But
I didn't play any of the. I just wanted the mainline ones. 1, 2, 3. That's
there you go.
I'm not going in between. Which actually, well, I mean, I'm sorry to like
go for it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, objectively speaking, okay, like Nomura. A criticism that I can see objectively about Nomura's style, or the direction that Final Fantasy VII Remake is taking, is that in order to get the context necessary to explain what you just saw, like the ending, You need to dive into the entire compilation, and most of which is not very well received critically. You know, like Dirge of Cerberus is a terrible game. Apparently, I've never played it because of that reason. People are like, "Dude, that's the worst game ever." I'm like, "Oh my god!"
I'm gonna go out of my way to say this. I think that Dirge of Cerberus is mindless fun.
Okay, great.
Fun. So I'm not trying to say that it's good, but I think that the way that the game is presented isn't for everybody. I'm not like I know that I've only been into these games, and I'm going to say this too is that I am not a huge RPG fan either.
Oh, weird.
And one of the reasons of that is that I don't like turn-based combat at all. I think it's one of the like as a child, it was very frustrating for me to play a game like that after coming from tons of other like crazy like I think the only RPG I played like over and over again was Super Mario RPG. Legend of the Seven Stars. That was like, and it's still like one of my favorite games.
I love that game.
Yeah, I know, right? It's like art style. Like somebody needs, an indie developer needs to go and make a game that looks exactly like that. I will buy it.
I know.
Perfect. Or a re-release. I mean, that would be great too.
That would be pretty cool.
Anyway, the point of me bringing it up is that my brother loved RPGs, and what I got to learn through him playing these games, I was backseat gamer. That was older brother, younger brother. I was watching him play. But he would play like a ton of RPGs. I got to really enjoy the story aspect of all of these games. And that's what made me interested in it. It wasn't the gameplay. It was always the story for me.
Right.
That was the selling point. So when I went back to Dirge for this, I wasn't criticizing the gameplay. I was more just falling in love with all of these elements of the story that seemed to be so, and there's so much to talk about with Dirge of Cerberus. Like that's the weirdest game in the entire compilation. Like if you want to talk about some weird lore stuff, that is like a bountiful of like just weird ideas that we might not ever see again, but just super fun to talk about. But
I might have to. So, you're kind of selling me on Dirge of Cerberus. I'm actually kind of surprised. I'm like, I've seen gameplay and I've seen people play it, and they're like, I fucking hate this game. This game just drives me fucking crazy. And I watch it. I'm like, yeah, it does kind of seem, but it's kind of cool. I don't know. It's Vincent. He's got 2 guns. Yeah. He's like, yeah,
he's dark and ominous and a little creepy, but like he's kind of fun to play as and shoot a gun at people. Like it's just great. It's a bullet time. He's also really cool in the air, which I never really messed around with when I first played the game. But like jumping up and like having like a little slow-mo as you're like descending is pretty dope. I wouldn't mind a re-release. I'm not gonna lie.
Maybe they will. Guys. Maybe they will. Maybe like the whole thing about 7 Remake is like they're just gonna, re-release HD, fix up, a few little problems here and there.
Do you see how many like re-releases of that Kingdom Hearts series that there are?
Okay. Well,
like, that's just free money at that point.
Going back to my point though, like, okay, so Dirge of Cerberus, it was a mainline PS2 game that was widely available. And then you have the short stories that also give context to, the Final Fantasy VII world. And people need to who have read that, especially like, okay, let's Advent Children. It's not a great movie. It's not like, but like they actually released 2 versions, if I'm correct. There's the complete version, which is like 2 hours and 2 hours and 30 minutes. And then there's like the US version or like a short version like that most people.
It was a Blu-ray. That was the complete version was a Blu-ray release, from my understanding, and then it had added scenes. And even in subsequent releases of complete, there's still scenes missing. There's like a whole section of Sephiroth. I got mine on Amazon, and there's just a scene of Sephiroth just completely missing, and it's like the coolest part, which is really upsetting.
Yeah, and I think that's what the main issue is. Why a lot of people have played Remake and are like, they have no idea what the Whispers are. But if you had played the entire compilation and read all the stories, and it makes more sense. You're like, oh, these must be something to do with the live stream. So there's something with these Whispers that has to do with the live stream. Oh, they sound like the cries of the planet. from Dirge of Cerberus, and you're kind of like, oh, okay, this is all coming together, and you're like,
that's
oh,
the weirdest
really
thing too. Yeah, is that they're set up or elaborated on, and that's the one thing that was difficult too. Starting out doing these theory videos, is that it's hard to tell the difference between what is something that they're just expanding on from, like, how would you say this? Expanding on the game, like, let's say, like Jesse's story and all these other characters, that it's just an expansion of their character. And then what is an expansion? And then what is an expansion into the lore? So is, like, the Whispers like not a retcon, but just a new addition? Or is that something that's been set up that's just been elaborated on? And I've gotten that comment several times where it's like, the Whispers are just a new element. They're not set up. They're not the cries of the planet. But it's really hard not to see it that way once you go back to the other stories and just see, like, there's a scene in Dirge that I reference in part 2 that specifically has dialogue that's very similar to something that Sephiroth says in Remake.
Right.
When the Whispers occur, it's like, listen, and then Sephiroth says, listen, in Remake, and you're just like,
he literally says, like, the same thing that that what's his name says in your Reeves. Yes, thank you. So it literally says the same thing. It's like, listen,
so
do you hear them?
Yes, exactly. So it's weird because a lot of this could just be coincidental. And one of the parts of theorizing is that you kind of have to try your best to separate that kind of, like, level of paranoia theorizing. There's a lot that you could go into that subject of just, like, following breadcrumbs that just end up being nothing.
Right.
But then there are things like that where you're like, that seems so deliberate. And there's also evidence to back that up, where it's like Nomura got the idea of Remake during the development of Dirge. So if that's the case, then maybe there are things in that game. A lot of people are like, you talk about Dirge and Crisis Core so much. It's because those games are there's like an idea of Remake in Nomura's mind at that point from Dirge and Crisis Core. And I think because he had the idea of it, there is, like, an intent to set certain elements up for the future. It's kind of like a Kingdom Hearts, like, secret boss.
Well, he's especially with the very, very end where you realize that Zack is alive. That's when I was kind of excited, because at that point I had never played Crisis Core, but when I saw that, because I know who Zack is and I know how he dies, and I know, in Crisis Core I know how he dies. Oh, by the way, this is a spoiler podcast. We're gonna be talking about spoilers.
That's right. I hope that's, like, on the offset. That's why I always start my videos too the same way, where it's like, did I forget to? Oh no, that's just my intro. That's literally
just assume we're just spoilers. Anyway,
I got you on that. This is not a spoiler-free discussion.
Exactly. I'm going to put that in there. I'm going to use yours. I'm going to take it from your video and put it on the top of the podcast. Anyway, yes. So he's telling us, look, the compilation is important,
right?
And especially Crisis Core, because Crisis Core is actually a really good game, especially for PSP. Again, that's part of the criticism, is because not everyone had a PSP, and the only way that you could have enjoyed that game is if you had a PSP, or if you emulated it illegally, or legally if you had the game.
Yeah, technically, who knows anymore?
Technically, who knows? I don't know. Whatever. Anyway, so that excited me, and I was like, okay. I mean, I like the idea of changing things up. Like, right before, when they announced Remake was coming out, like a month out, and I told myself, like, look, I want a remake, but at the same time, I want it to be different. I want it to be exciting again. I don't want it to be the same story that I've watched people play and that I've played many times over the years, and I have watched theory videos like yourselves, and I want something different, and they did it, and I was like, okay, I'm happy with this. I am happy with this.
I think the one thing that I would still like, the one cautionary part of Remake to me that's kind of lingered through finishing it is that what I didn't really like is how fast and sudden that ending kind of was dropped onto people's laps. And I'm all for, like, carving, like, a new path, telling a different story, whatever it is that they want to do. But what I don't want is for it to be thrown in my face too aggressively. And I think that's why it took me time after the game was finished with on my end to sort of sit back and see if it was actually going to be like this later, because it seemed like it was important to say what they said at the end of that game with all the callbacks, all the things that were going on. Like, it all seemed necessary. But in future titles, what I would really, really, really prefer is for them to not be so like
heavy-handed,
shoving it down. Yeah, heavy-handed. I would like maybe just some background storytelling, which seems to be a bigger thing in the compilation. Some not so much, and some of it is.
Right. Yeah.
Like the Deep Ground reference is like a really good a good way of looking at it. Is that Deep Ground is a Dirge of Cerberus idea that is very, not subtly, but like not as heavily handed added to the story of Final Fantasy VII Remake. I can't remember what part it is exactly. It's when you go for Wedge down into the cavern area, like underneath Midgar. So all of that is Deep Ground. That's a reference directly to Dirge of Cerberus. They have like those really weird like monsters, those failed experiments that come out. Like the design of those is a callback to Deep Ground and all this other stuff, but that's like easy storytelling in a not so abrasive way. So if you know what Deep Ground is, and you're looking at these creatures and just the setting that you're in and like what they're alluding to, that's proper storytelling visually. Like, it's just a small segment and they're just dropping it there.
Right.
Whereas the ending, you go through a portal and there's a giant monster there. And the giant monster is, if you just read the description, is like, just there's so much just immediately being like, okay, you need to buy into this or this isn't going to work. It's like
the dump truck. Like Maximilian Dude said, they just dump trucked everything all at once.
Exactly, and it's okay. Like I still like it. I still like all the things that are happening in it. I would just prefer, because now they're taking more time with the game in terms of like segmented storytelling, or in future titles. I would prefer a little bit less of that heavy hand on it.
And maybe they will. Maybe they just wanted to blow their load a little bit and just like kind of shock people at first, and then, kind of slowly. Hopefully, maybe. I don't know.
I think it's just all about like whether or not they want to be so forward about it, but then there's so many elements of 7 that are subtle and not even things that we've been able to figure out until now, like where the Cetra come from and all this other stuff. It's that entire background is still very mysterious, and how that whole like event 2,000 years ago played out. And that's been a mystery since the first game. Like, none of the compilation is really touched on that stuff.
No.
So it's cool to just have that like kind of ambiguity.
It's entirely possible, because I've watched your videos like a million times, and it's still so much information to retain. I love the direction, though, your theories are going, where the planet has its own set of goals, and it's not necessarily great. And I think, and then for your last video, when you're talking about Norse mythology and how Ragnarok is sort of the cycle is just going to keep continuing, and it's sort of like, it's sort of comforting for the hardcores out there that want a 1-to-1 remake, that not a whole lot's going to change, because the cycle is just going to repeat, and so that frees up the developers to be like, okay, we can take some liberties, but we want to maintain the Final Fantasy VII story. But because of the first game, it does set up, and like you say in your theory videos, there's going to be something other than Sephiroth. We just don't know what. According to you, and I'm totally on board with this, I think it's Minerva. I think it's totally Minerva.
I'm 100%. I agree with you agreeing with me. I do think that it's definitely going to be, and that's that whole subject of 3. I've been hearing a lot. Part 3 of my videos, I've been hearing a lot about, where it's people are sort of torn on the way that I've presented that, where it's like things are going to be the same because the cycle is repetition. Things happen and then it just all starts over. I would say loosely is the word that I want to exercise in part 4 is that loosely the events will be playing out similarly. I really like, and I'm going to talk about this later in different theory videos, but I'll say it here is that I really think, I'm like 80% sure about this, is that Final Fantasy VII Remake is going to end in the same place that that the original did. You're going to have the fight with Sephiroth, and all of that event is going to be very much the same. The difference is going to be the context of that fight, what is exactly happening there. And with all of this new injection of lore and like the storytelling and what they're expanding on, it's going to be very different. But it's going to be the same event.
Well, it's also it's exciting, especially when you think about Minerva, because you bring up Minerva a lot, and I'm excited about Minerva because I'm like, fuck, I totally forgot about fucking Minerva.
I didn't even know who she was, honestly. I never even got to that part, and I was like, who is this? Like this crazy.
Then you make the connection between like how Sephiroth kind of looks like her at the very end of Final Fantasy VII with the rings. You know, it's kind of similar. Similar. It's entirely possible that the very end of Final Fantasy VII Remake, it's going to be a Sephiroth Minerva mix up. It's like, we've done this before, and now Minerva is going to come, and you're like, who the fuck is Minerva? What the hell is this? And she's like, now it's big, huge Sephiroth. I just got excited.
So, I'm right there with you, and I would say that what you just said is not too far off what I'm assuming is happening as well, is that there's something very similar to Sephiroth, and there's something very similar to Minerva, and 3 things that I can't mention. I can mention 2 of them, and I think it's the purple flower and the yellow flower connection.
Yeah, actually.
Something that connects to those 2 characters specifically, but there's one third thing that is the kind of the prime subject of 4 that I haven't talked about, but it directly links the characters.
Okay.
But the wheel, like what you mentioned before with the wheel, is that there seems to be a depiction of gods or like deities that have this wheel representation. Minerva has it, Safer Sephiroth has it, and then even like the Wutai god, the water god, has it in like the statue in Wutai. It's all very
I need
odd.
to check that out.
But I think that definitely plays into a connection there. And there's a lot of like half circles too, like incomplete circles. There's a lot of church imagery that also depicts like cycles or some sort of circle. And I've been looking a lot into that. And it's that, if you want to talk about paranoid theorizing, like that's like the subject to go into. But
all right. I think it's time. We're already here. We're into remake territory, and we're getting deep. So I think this would be perfect time to start bringing up the questions, because then we'll just be talking about remake, and we're also including the community. That's kind of cool.
Let's do it. I'm excited.
All right, so
thank you guys, by the way.
Yeah, this is really cool. We got a lot, so hopefully we can get through all of them before like my computer like blows up. All right, let's start with Twitter. From @secludedrpger on Twitter. Does Kadaj, Laws, and Yazoo being accepted into the live stream have anything to do with the Sephiroth we see at the edge of creation?
Ooh, that's already a hard answer. Let's see. So I think I'm still of the mind that the 3 friends archetype from Genesis and Jill and Sephiroth, then going into like Kadaj and the boys, like the representation of 3 archetype that seems to be playing out over time. I still think that holds up. And I know that that's like a divisive theory that I've had.
Mm-hmm.
There's similarities between, let's just take the last boss fight, for example, is that you have those 3 representations of the Harbinger, right? And then they become a Bahamut. The big pointer for everybody was to look at Kadaj and his brothers and say, okay, well, Kadaj summons a Bahamut. And because of that, this is also a callback in Remake to those characters. And I agree, like it's 100% not debatable that like those characters are the ones being depicted in that way in Remake. But then, Bahamuts are summoned by Genesis, and he could very easily connect himself to the same archetype that Kadaj represents. We're talking about Loveless archetype, by the way.
I like where you're going. It's like it's a bigger. It all acts as a bigger symbolism as well as
Yeah, and that's the one thing that I've been trying to keep in mind with Remake a lot is that like just one group or one meaning isn't necessarily enough for the developers. It seems like multiple meanings. Like my favorite example is I miss it. The steel blue, the steel sky. That Aerith says at the end of Remake is that is not only a depiction of how she feels at that moment where she feels like vulnerable, she's going out in the world. There's a lot of good character stuff in that, but that's also a callback to Crisis Core is she says the same thing to Zack.
Oh, so, that's right.
Which is super weird, but then like now you're dealing with two meanings already. So it's in my mind, what I try and keep in mind as I'm looking through stuff is that you have to make sure that you're identifying at the many meanings in one thing. So I think to answer the question a little bit more directly, I think that Kadaj is probably I don't know if I wouldn't say that it has a lot to do with how Sephiroth appears at the end of the game. I think that their importance to the timeline at that point is to depict the AC timeline. That's the future that you're preventing.
Right.
So I think the reason why that archetype of Kadaj is being used is because they're directly linked to Sephiroth. And as I've talked about in my other videos, the purple association is like a callback to like depictions of Genova, depictions of Sephiroth through the game. So I don't know if because it seems like at the end of AC when Kadaj is let into the live stream, he turns into the green, iconic look of the live stream. There's no like black, like strands of that, as people have called it in the past, like the negative live stream. There's no depictions of that. I think if anything, they're being kind of purified in that moment to be allowed into it. It's the same way that Kadaj reacts in Advent Children when in the church right before Kadaj and Cloud fight in AC. They unleash this fountain and it starts to rain. And Kadaj has this reaction of like, oh, get this fucking water off of me. Because he's like his very being, I think, is being
cleansed,
like undone. Yes, cleansed. So I think their involvement in the live stream is not 100% necessary for his appearance. But it's interesting that they would make that callback so directly. But it's a good question.
Yeah, that is a really good question. Sure yeah. From AA Ermies on Twitter, they asked, I think diving more into, this is okay, this is a question. It sounded like a statement, but it's a question. I think diving more into the, quote, follow them, the yellow flowers thing would be very interesting. Like, why the yellow ones?
So right off the bat, just to not get too far into it, is that yellow seems to be a representation of good, and purple flowers, which we see throughout Remake and Crisis Core, are usually a representation of evil. It's in the Ultimania that the flowers are mentioned as being like associated with fear, specifically, the purple ones, whereas we only see the yellow flowers really depicted through connection to Aerith, or like something significant to her actions. So even in the end of Remake, you see that with the flower communicating to Marlene that she can now feel Barrett's presence at the end, even though they're not in the same space. It's all like associated with good things. Whereas the purple, again, evil. But the follow them, the yellow flowers thing is interesting because this is the first time we're kind of seeing into the psyche of Aerith losing faith in that path. So even though it's depicted as good, I don't think that at the end of all this, we're going to have that same understanding of what the yellow flowers are. I think the yellow flowers, it's like a black and white thing that is mentioned throughout the entire Remake. Where it's like these lines are being drawn between you are bad and I am good. And the yellow flowers are depicting the same thing. I'm yellow, you're purple, right? But at the end of all this, I think we're going to find ourselves in the gray area.
Well, I think to piggyback off that, I think, like I said earlier, it's like the planet has its own goals, and it's to maintain this balance. But the balance itself it seems kind of unbalanced in a way, because you have Sephiroth, who wants to be taken out of his jail. He wants to control his destiny. At the same time, Aerith does too, because she sees problems with this whole cycle and this whole balance. It's not right. There's something wrong about it that she wants to fix. Yes. And so we might see something where the yellow flowers they don't necessarily mean good, and the purple doesn't necessarily mean evil either. And actually, I do want to ask you one question. Don't the flowers turn into the dumb apples, like the actual
the purple flowers turn into the dumb apples from Crisis Core.
Right.
I think that...
And don't they have healing properties?
They're associated with being better for your health.
Okay.
That people live longer after eating them. A part of that could just be propaganda of because Benora apples are used for the juice, the Benora apple juice.
Right.
That you see in posters in the very start of Remake.
Right.
So it could be like a nod to the propaganda of this sugary drink is healthy for you.
Yeah, Red Bull.
Exactly. Gives you wings, right? Pretty much. Sponsor. Later. We'll figure that one out.
Oh my God. Red Bull should come out with a drink that's Final Fantasy 7 and it's Sephiroth with the wings. Fucking
later.
Come on, Red Bull. Give me that money. That's my idea.
Cut me in on that. We'll make a deal after this.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the purple, the apples are sort of, you can kind of go either way with it, whether they're healthy or not. But yes,
also on the subject of the flowers. Sorry to cut you off.
Go for
but you also go into one of your videos about Minerva and how she kind of represents the purple. Am I correct?
Yeah. So that's the thing about the character. Is that once I found her, I was really just looking for that flower association or the apple association. Actually, the apple association was kind of like an aside because I didn't really know why. In part 1, I was looking at the apple. I was like, if Sephiroth is evil, no, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
If Sephiroth is evil, then why are the apples in Crisis Core purple? But that seems pretty deliberate. So I couldn't really figure out why that was there until part 4, and I started looking at it. I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that my perception of that character has really evolved over time, because the more I look into things, the more relevance she seems to have. So she is associated with the purple, but she's also associated with the yellow flowers.
She's
super interesting.
I love in the video about Minerva that you make the distinction between her and Aerith, because at face value you can just say that Minerva is exactly like Aerith and they're whatever. But no, there's a distinction.
Green eyes.
There's a distinction here. Minerva does not show compassion. We see that with when she looks at Genesis and just kind of
she doesn't want to touch him.
No, doesn't want to get the fuck away from me. Yeah. You have cooties. Get out of here.
Exactly.
And so, but
I hate Loveless.
I know, Loveless is stupid. But again, you make the distinction, and Aerith in a similar situation where she doesn't have to heal Kadaj, but she does. She accepts him. And maybe that has something to do with the earlier question, maybe because they're technically Genova cells. Am I correct? And they were, right? They have Genova cells in them. Kadaj, Laz, and Yazoo.
Oh, so they are technically associated with Genova just by default because they're associated with Sephiroth, but they are manifestations of his will.
Okay.
So I guess technically, yes, they would be connected.
So I wonder, because Aerith accepted them into the live stream, if that, maybe that had something to do with the whispers being contaminated. I don't know. Anyway, we can just move on.
There's a lot of stuff, the contamination of the live stream that and that was the thing too, is in part 2, I was looking back. I was like, if Genova in depictions of her before, we see her in 2,000 years ago, there's a talk of her spreading a virus. And I was like, well, that sounds like the virus that we're already seeing in Advent Children. So has this just been happening like since the beginning? Like since the beginning of these cycles, has just things been just becoming contaminated? And honestly, like how far that can go is,
yeah,
you can interpret that in many different ways.
Right. You could let's move. I think let's move on. Here we go. I'm trying to freaking do my notes on my phone and everything's small and tiny. Okay, here we go. Reddit. We're on to Kinu5 asked, what helps you decide which details are worth investigating? Stuff like Rufus's coin or stuff that I completely glossed over, and there are a ton of little details like those in your videos.
That's a good question. I mainly just look for patterns. So like the really easy one for me, because I came from a background in studying film, specifically cinematography, which is the visual language of film, is that the purple color showing up in Remake was like, I wonder if this is in other places, this depiction of this color. And it showed up in the beginning of the game, and then it just kind of kept mounting up. And I was like, well, if they're associated with this, it's associated with Sephiroth's song in the beginning in the alley, and then later it's associated with Genova, and then in the compilation, purple is also associated with that color. Genova is, and Sephiroth, and just mainly bad things. You just start to pick up on those patterns. So it does have to take like a good leap of faith. There's plenty of patterns that I've noticed that end up not paying off at all. One of them, as an example, being there's a fountain in Remake that like on Loveless Avenue, like right after you talk to Aerith. You go to this fountain after talking to her, and the fountain blows up and all this other stuff. If you look around the area of that fountain area, there are 4 flower patterns on the ground. They're not like, I don't know how to describe exactly what their function is, but they're placed on every side of the fountain in the corner. So there's one on one corner, one on the other, and the other 2. And I was like, I am going to bet right now that this area is going to come back in some big way. I don't know how, but we know that flowers have this other connection that I found, so I'm going to look into this. I did some digging around, and there's actually 6 in that area. There's 6 flower points in that area, which is super weird, because 6 is also a big important number that we're going to talk about later, but it's associated with wings. And I was like, maybe this is like being pointed at, like the number 6 is here, flowers are here, maybe this area has some importance. I came to realize like right after playing through that section that pattern just shows up in just nonsensical places. So like just on street corners, like before you jump on the train, like there's 3 of them like right before you jump on the train. And I was like, because these are there, it really like kind of doesn't validate like my first point. I do still think
it could be a pattern. It also could be just the developers like, we need something to put something here. Exactly. What about those flowers? Put those flowers in there. That's okay, and move on.
And it's easy to like kind of shoo those things away. And I've put things like that in my videos before, but I try my best to use my own self-restraint in putting those things all into the video, because I'm like, somebody's just going to look at that, find out this themselves, and just immediately know that this could just be shooed away. And some of them are interesting and some of them aren't. So as long as they're interesting and I make a note of it for people that this is maybe not as, sound structurally as a theory, it's fun to talk about. So I probably will eventually bring that up. But to answer the question simply, patterns are easy things to follow, and you should just trust your instinct and say, if that's there, I need to go looking for it. I literally spent like the last 2 days looking at fountains, and that's not a joke. I went to Crisis Core, I went to Dirge of Cerberus, and I went to Remake just to look at fountains in certain areas in the game. And there's one in Benora, there's one in Loveless Avenue, and there's one in Calm in dirge, and none of it made any difference to the research. But it's really great when you find something that's more than that.
But I bet it's exhilarating. I bet, it's just like those movies where you're just like, you're writing something and then you look and something's like on the table. It's something that you hadn't seen before. And you're just
that's
like,
it.
Dear God.
He is Kaiser Soze.
He is Kaiser Soze.
Drop the cup. Play the slow-mo scene. I'll have a button for that somewhere on my desk.
All right, next question. Basilius from Reddit. I'm really curious about two things. First, how can Rufus see the whispers? I know this was touched on in the second video, but I would love to hear some debate about it. Second, what's going on with Marlene?
Do you want to try that one first?
I will. And a lot of these questions, I'm just going to yield the floor because I am not nearly as good as you when it comes to this stuff. But I will say from your video, it makes sense as him having some sort of Cetra heritage. Now, and I looked at his eye color because, like you said, eyes, people who are Cetris or Mako, whatever, or it's the signal of the live stream, and so Cetra have greenish eyes. Rufus has sort of bluish greenish eyes.
Yeah,
and so, but I can't think of any other reason why he could see the whispers other than either A, he does have Cetra blood in him, or two, he's some sort of weird experiment that we don't know about yet.
I think that seems to be such an odd, and I've gotten a lot of crap for that particular theory because I said in the video, and I'm going to make this clear now. I said in the video that, timeline wise, it made sense that he would be an experiment, but apparently Elfana, Aerith's mother, would have been kind of young for that to be her to be the mother, which is fine. I think that that was great that was pointed out. But the weird thing about the scene is, just as you said, is that there's not a lot of wiggle room. And because, just to theorize with it, it could either be Cetra blood or some sort of experiment. And I still believe that it's one of those things, into some capacity. I
mean, it's entirely possible that he, because you said it in the video too, it's like it could have something to do with Sephiroth too.
Right. It could just be the thing about that too is that because they changed his age, he became not eligible to be a Genova experiment in any sense because of the age difference now, which again is super weird because it's taking that off the table on purpose. It's why would you change his age?
It's entirely possible too that we just don't know about it. Like I said about, like an experiment, we just don't know about how he can see the whispers yet, and it'll be elaborated on later in other installments.
Exactly.
It could be simple as they, utilized Elfana's blood and infused it with, the President Shinra's actual son, when he was really young, and they just got a big syringe and let's see if this works and let's see what happens.
I like what you're saying there too, because there's a lot of evidence in the original concept of Final Fantasy VII of Elfana's blood, some part of Elfana being used, which we haven't heard about, by the way. That's completely, it's not in 7, it's not in this. It is in Remake when Hojo mentions it.
Right.
Yeah, so he has Elfana, parts or cells or something. So it seems very likely that being introduced in Remake is going to be elaborated on in some way. There's just so much with that.
Yeah, dude, that makes sense too, because why would he say that? Why would just to have a weird, creepy moment where he's we used every part of her body,
right?
we just need to make Hojo the worst person ever. So let's have him say this. No, they haven't say it for a reason. Element. They haven't say it for a reason. So it's entirely possible that they did use Elfana for a whole bunch of experiments that we have yet to find out about.
Right, and that I think, as you mentioned, it definitely seems like an inclusion to wherever that arc of Hojo's experiments is going to lead to. I talk about his other experiments leading to some interesting things on one end, but that I haven't mentioned before, the set having Elfana, and that has huge implications of like future events. So it's very, I'm not going to say it's very likely. Let's just say that theoretically it is possible, because looking at Genesis really quick is that he's injected with Genova cells after being born. He's not given them to them like Sephiroth or Angeal. He's actually given Genova cells after being born. So that's why he is different from Angeal, why he's different from Sephiroth in terms of how he was made. You could easily say the same thing could have been done to Rufus, in the way that he could have been born, injected with a certain type of, gene or whatever, fantasy world, inject this to him and have something happen. And the one thing that points to this that makes it interesting, and I'm not saying that this is structurally sound, but looking at his hair color too, it's very muted. And that was something that I thought was an interesting design choice for him, is that instead of being blonde like his father, he has like a grayish sort of like muted tone to
it's kind of white, which probably made sense for a lot of people linking him to Sephiroth. Right. Because, they both have kind of whitish kind of hair. Yeah, exactly. And I think that in it's similar to the Elfana scene with Hojo, is that him seeing the whispers is like completely out of the way of the story that's happening right now. So the developers wanted to take you from the action that's happening with Cloud and everybody and just put the camera on them for a bit, and just to very clearly illustrate that Rufus can see the whispers. So that is also intentional. It's not like a throwaway side thing. I think they're really trying to build up the mystery of like, why is this happening? Yeah. One of the things that I noticed is that he has fingerless gloves. So a lot of people have been mentioning he's fighting Cloud. Cloud could have transferred sight to Rufus. Totally possible. But I think that they're going to try and go for something bigger and more reveal, like a big reveal. So trying to keep that in mind, but it also could be nothing. So yeah. I mean, that's a good explanation too. Like they did fight, and I guess like everyone who's touched the person that's seen the whispers can also see the whispers. That's interesting. That's an interesting observation. All right, let's go to the next series of questions from Takafumi Sakagami. He says, all right, I've got some prompts that could lead to some thinking. With the seeming assertion that the events of Final Fantasy VII are cyclical in both events and now potentially in time, do you think Sephiroth is aware of the scale of this beyond the single time loop of Final Fantasy VII R, that is? I do think that I think that there's a couple of key things that make that visually obvious to me, in things that I've researched, that he also says like nonchalantly to Aerith that she has a clouded vision of what's happening during, like right before we go through the portal. He's like, those who see with clouded eyes see nothing but shadows. He's telling Aerith in that moment, to me, and this is my interpretation, is that she's only looking at it from one side, whereas Sephiroth has this foresight that she doesn't possess exactly. So, and this is one of the reasons why I think he was able to fool her into this situation to begin with, is because she kind of only has a certain amount of information, not the whole picture. I do think he does. We're going to go more into that in a second, in future parts, but I do think that he has a bigger scope in his mind of how things play out. And I also forgot that somebody mentioned Marlene in a last question. Oh, that's right. Yeah. I'm going to very quickly answer that, which is that I think Marlene is not a Cetra. I really don't think that that's the case. I think that she is a practitioner of the belief system that Aerith has set up. It could be just children. Innocence. And there's a lot of story elements that involve children being able to see things, like how many ghost stories do you hear, like mom check it out, and then the mom would look and there's nothing there, but the kid is like looking at a ghost, right? Similar sort of storytelling elements. Yeah, so I think that there's definitely, like, you can very easily make a connection between her and Aerith and the way that she sort of says certain things that are very like alluding to, but I would say that it's more about the belief that she shares that is similar to Aerith, rather than it being like a direct Cetra connection. I think that AC also has a lot that,
happens just simply because of Aerith's presence. A lot of talking points, a lot of like the structure of that movie relies on like thinking about what she represented to begin with.
Right.
So that's just being directly reflected, the innocence, what she represented in that character. There are also a slew of other characters that you can point to and say similar things about, like Marlene and Dirge, which is something that I'll also be talking about later. So thank you for that question as well.
Well, we're going into Dirge right now because further with it, we're not done with I can say his name, Takafumi. Let's go. Furthermore, if cycles are the talking point, does Vincent take up a more prominent role, with him being the bearer of the proto-materia? Taking the Dirge of Cerberus stuff further, does the corrupted life stream that births chaos relate to Jenova?
I think that's 100% the case. I think that they're very similar in a lot of ways. And I honestly, like I said at the beginning of this with Dirge, is that like some of the craziest lore stuff comes from that. It might not all be included, but I do think one of the things to pull from Dirge is that there's a character, a character named Nero, who is the brother of Vice, who is the sort of head honcho of the Sviets, which is this army in deep ground. And Nero and Vice are very powerful figures in deep ground and just powerful entities to begin with. How they were made is crazy. How like they're depicted is crazy. But Nero has something. They kind of represent like black and white, sort of like a yin yang thing. Whereas Vice is like represented as white, and Nero is represented as black, which we know just immediately is a color association that plays into the good and bad sides of Final Fantasy VII. But Nero has something directly associated with Jenova, which is that their eyes are the same color. When Nero activates this sort of like otherworldly power that is black and like can take people into different dimensions, it's very like Kingdom Hearts-esque.
Right.
His eyes start to glow purple, which we know from Jenova is how her single eye radiates purple. So there's a connection being made there, and also with the way that he was made. So I know that was only part of the question, but I do think that the corrupted, I think there was something about the corrupted life stream in there as well.
Yeah.
Can you reread that question?
Yeah, it's a big question. Taking the Dirge of Cerberus stuff further, does the corrupted life stream that births chaos relate to Jenova?
Right. So the pool is, I think, the aftermath of Genova's first landing or first impression on the planet, is that pool is created because the planet separates the life stream from the geostigma infection that is similar to, I guess I make a connection that Genova's virus is geostigma. You can interpret it a different way, but I think that pool is created from the planet being able to filter out the geostigma through the proto-materia to create that pool. So I think Chaos and Jenova are completely a linked entity. So, or have some relation to each other that definitely needs to be figured out. So.
Right. And then moving on to same Takafumi. Oh, god dang it. My freaking notes. The two big bads of Shinra are the President and Hojo. What hand do they have in all this? Does Hojo still intend to merge with Omega?
I am very skeptical that about that whole plot line of Dirge being included, because I think what they're going to be doing is picking and choosing more.
Yeah, well, like I said in my review, I said, like, look, what they're probably going to, what they're doing with Remake is they're taking this opportunity to do sort of like an X-Men Days of Future Past situation where they realize that X-Men 3 is terrible and everyone hates it. And so they're going to make the whole plot line of the next movie to say, hey, yeah, we know you hate this part. We're going to just cut that out with this movie, and this movie's going to be dope. And the movie was pretty cool.
It was. I like that one.
But so that's what they're doing with Remake, in my opinion, is they're just saying, okay, we understand that people don't like 100% of the stuff that's in Dirge, but there are stuff that we still like that we're going to put in here as the context.
There's like some examples of that, like with Genesis showing up Nibelheim and Crisis Core, where people I just know are just not into that idea, and they would just rather the scene just play out the way that the original does. And the beauty of remaking a game is that you can kind of look at elements of a story and repackage them in a way that might be a little bit more interesting to the people playing it. So maybe the idea of Hojo being merged with Omega in Dirge of Cerberus might stay. I think the way that they're going to tell that story, if they ever do, is going to be different.
And then Takafumi further, this is actually a really good question, because this is a question I had. Now that Aerith is potentially betraying the wishes of Gaia, will she still be accepted and instructed by the life stream? How reliable was the information we had about the Cetra anyway?
I think that is a really good question. I don't think that the information on and anything in the past that we've been able to take from, like depictions of the past, have been 100% factual. There's actually a lot of things that I'm going to be bringing up in other parts that suggest otherwise, and that there is a sort of skewing of the truth that's happening on purpose, specifically by Jenova, where she was able to, there's a small depiction of her in being able to shapeshift and become other people. That happens like in a book as well with Kadaj before the events of AC happen, is that Kadaj also shares that ability with Jenova, where he's able to look like somebody that you know, but not, and it's just crazy. That sounds fucking story.
Crazy.
By the way, where did that come into AC? I don't know. Anyway.
Right, exactly.
Something that probably would have been cool to show up. But the point of what I was saying, I guess, is, what was I saying? We're talking about
the information. Is it reliable? How reliable is the information about the Cetra?
I don't think it's reliable. I think Jenova is depicted as skewing the truth of the past. So I think depiction. So, and this is also a subject for later, but I think that we're going to find out later on is that there are dual meaning to the prophecies that we've been told as well, and that they represent not just one side of the story, but actually both sides. Rather than it just being about the good, it's also going to be about the evil. And I think that that's the way that we should be interpreting a lot of these tablets. The way that these are, like the Cetra are depicted, is that there's not just one way of looking at it.
I mean, it's when you made the connection between the Cetra and the Shinra, how they both have like similar things, that kind of like put me in perspective. Is like we see the Cetra as these like people that did good and only good because they're our ancestors.
Because we're awesome.
Yeah, because we're Cetra and we use magic and we're one with the planet and blah, blah, blah. But then when you said that like they could, Shinra and Cetra could be linked, I was like, oh, we're totally forgetting that Cetra are people that, they were close to the planet doesn't mean that they're all good, So it's entirely possible that the Cetra and there's two sides of the Cetra, and and that again goes back to the whole balance thing, where it you need to have balance. You can't just have 100% good, and then 100% evil. The balance is off.
Right. There's some sort of middle, and that's again, I think that's the main setup of Remake, is to kind of explain to us or set up the idea that not everything is going to be black and white, and that there's going to be people that are good that do bad things, and then there's going to be bad people who do good things.
And that's like good storytelling, at least good modern storytelling.
I would completely agree with that. And I think it might just start with Shinra right now. Like that's the example that is also given in the original, where it's like, this is our depiction of Shinra, and it might not be all this way that we think, or it can be compared to like different groups' actions and all this other stuff. Right. I think that concept is going to blow up into, okay, well now what's your thought of Jenova in all of this? Do you think that she is only bad, or does she have some similarities?
This actually leads into one question. I think we're done with Takafumi. We'll go back. There's one more question from Takafumi that's pretty good, but we're going to go, because this leads into this question, because from Schrodinger's Oven from Reddit, he goes, gosh dang it, the possibility. Hang on. Fine. I wanted to get your input on the possibility of a redemption arc for Sephiroth.
I've been hearing a lot about that.
He put a long post on it, and it's actually really good. And I can't remember any of it because I just can't remember anything. But it was really good. It's a great question because, there's a lot of, at least for me, there's a lot of similarities to Darth Vader in a lot of ways. Like he's become the personification of evil, but we also forget that, Darth Vader is Darth Vader. But we also we also don't mention the fact that he actually saved his son at the very end, sacrificing himself to save his. It's entirely possible that they are setting up a moment where Sephiroth may be the bad guy to the very end, and then something will happen where he does get a redemption arc, where he sacrifices himself. He realizes what Cloud has been telling him this whole time of like, there's nothing I don't cherish. And he finally gets it. And it might be the merging with him and something else like Minerva. And somehow the way to separate them is for Sephiroth to essentially become human again and be a good guy, be a good person, and understand that what he's doing is wrong. It's not working. It's not working for the balance of the planet or whatever. I don't know how well that would actually work, but that's a thought I had.
I like where you're going with it because I haven't really sat down and talked to anybody directly about that idea of him having like this redemption. I've seen it mentioned to me. I haven't sort of solidified my opinion on that necessarily, and I do think that there's it's a really awesome idea to be able to take this villain and use him in a way that maybe we're not expecting. He has also been compared to Jaws in other depictions of like how the developers wanted to use him, and it's a strange subject, Sephiroth, because there are so many different depictions of him in the way that we've seen him. So we have him at the beginning of Final Fantasy VII before he falls into the Nibelheim reactor with Jenova. That is a separate Sephiroth. Then we have the one after that incident in Nibelheim where he's in the northern crater at that point, right? And his body is reforming. And the more that I've talked to people about Sephiroth, just like through like my group of friends who are insanely more like knowledgeable and have been like in this game of talking about Final Fantasy VII for a lot longer than I have, mentioned to me that even the Sephiroth in AC, we don't know exactly if that's the same Sephiroth that was in Final Fantasy VII, because a lot of how Sephiroth is being reborn in that section is not only because of Jenova cells being used through Kadaj, but also is assisted by Cloud's depiction of Sephiroth. So it's his memory kind of conveying to us a physical representation along with Jenova, along with Kadaj. So that Sephiroth is super different. And also the Sephiroth before AC wanted to just rule the planet or start everything anew again. Like there's different ways that you can look at that too. But then this other Sephiroth's like, nah, I want to get off this planet. Like I'm going to use this as a vessel to get out of here. And it's like, so I can't reliably sort of look at those depictions and then look at the Sephiroth and know exactly what's happening. I do mention in my videos that I do think that this Sephiroth might be a more human version, or more similar to the human version of Sephiroth that we see before Nibelheim, or after the Nibelheim incident, when he reabsorbs Meteor, getting his memories back, being able to come back that way. I think that this Sephiroth could be more human than AC, and maybe because of that have more potential to be redeemed at some point.
It's definitely an interesting, it's a fun theory to think about, like, and it's a fun thing to do with the character, like you said, like that's something that we wouldn't expect because we're always expecting him to just come in and do evil shit. But it'd be like really cool to see, like, you know, if the whole idea is that Cloud essentially keeps Sephiroth alive in the state that we know Sephiroth, like what would that mean if Cloud truly forgave Sephiroth and then pictured Sephiroth in a different way? You know what I'm saying? Like,
Oh, well, that like his influence of his memories making him into like a different form of what we've seen him before. That's
right, because before Sephiroth went all crazy and burnt Nibelheim down, there's a moment where you enter Nibelheim, according to Zack's and Cloud's memories, actually, where Sephiroth turns to Cloud, this fucking foot soldier that is he doesn't have to talk to this guy, but he does, and he goes, "You're from Nibelheim, aren't you?" And he's just like having like a conversation with this foot soldier that he it's fucking Sephiroth. He's like the hero or whatever, and he's just talking to this foot soldier.
He's the guy.
He's like the guy, and he's giving Cloud the time of day when he doesn't have to. That's a really nice thing. That's a really nice thing for Sephiroth to do.
There is a lot of people bringing up to me, or just things that I see about Crisis Core's depiction of Sephiroth and him just being a little bit more sassy, a little bit more like lively, because we've always just seen this guy as a villain. It would be nice, definitely, to see him more in that light or depicted in a more human way at some point in Remake. I will say that. Like, I really think that would be something to really build up his character in an interesting way, is maybe even if he doesn't end up getting a redemption story, maybe we can feel sorry for him in some way.
Well, you do in a way in the original Final Fantasy VII, when he realizes that he's nothing but just this fucking experiment, and he's just like, who's my mother? And he starts, freaking out.
He loses his mind.
And it's a story as old as time.
Figured out if I was an alien.
Yeah, it's a story as old as time, and it's a great story because everyone at one point like goes through a really dark place in their lives, and it's at that moment that you either, pull yourself up or you go dive deeper into darkness and start doing some really terrible things, either like take drugs or whatever, start killing people, Yeah,
some just like jump off of this all starts.
But so like people, you do feel sorry for him in that moment, and then he does some really evil shit, like kill Aerith, and you're like, okay, now I hate you. I don't feel sorry for you anymore.
You brought up a very interesting point, and I think it's something that should definitely be illustrated. Is that Final Fantasy VII? How many like full parent groups do you see in it? Cloud doesn't have a father. Tifa doesn't have a mother. He only has a father. All of these characters are disassociated with like a complete family as you would imagine it. Sephiroth is the same way. There's a lot of this parental figure, dysfunctional sort of family. It's not elaborated on extensively, but that's something that I've always wanted to be brought up.
Holy crap, you are totally right. The only father figure in the whole game is freaking Barrett.
Yeah, he's running the show of Avalanche for that group of people too, and they in their own ways dysfunctional, but he takes the burden on for them. So it's like these unconventional family dynamics.
Yeah.
But it's also in the way that Aerith in Advent Children is depicted. It's like she's the mother. Like people confuse her with the mother, and Cloud. Yeah, there's all sorts of that stuff, and a lot of people think that like this theorizing can go into the realm of like lack of emotion and more just like from a lore perspective. But I really think that the more that you get into this stuff, it actually just complements the emotional side of this story so much more. In that same way, the only reason I noticed that was because of the theoretical research. Just to look at it and be like, oh man, like this might have a lot more to do with like just these interesting family dynamics and like people looking for like a missing piece of that in some way.
Yeah, that's a really good observation. That's really that's pretty that makes sense. Like it gives motivation to all these characters a little bit. You're like, well, not motivation necessarily, but just you have it makes you able to understand where all these characters are going through.
Right.
All right, let's go back to Takafumi here.
We all appreciate you guys just posting these.
Yeah, this is fantastic. We already did that one. The last one is the whispers are supposed to be the voices of the planet, right? Does this mean the voices of the life stream? We know that there are two kinds of post-life existences, those who join with the live stream and those who linger due to the corruption, some later joining with Sephiroth. Does those corrupted lives have an effect on the whispers?
I think that it's kind of that's a good distinction to make, and maybe one that I wasn't very good about keeping in mind when I started these. Excuse me. But Yes. So there's like two different layers of the afterlife. People who don't want to be accepted into the live stream because they hold on to, the emotion of hatred. So there's like an emotional standpoint of like joining the live stream. And then there is a lack of want from the live stream to let certain people in because of their association from geostigma, as I've come to understand it.
Sorry, my dog was trying to get on my lap and
I was
almost knocked over everything down. Sorry, I didn't listen to a word you said, but that's fine. They did, and that's all that matters.
Yeah. So, what kind of dog do you have, by the way?
I have a miniature dachshund, miniature long-haired dachshund.
I'm a dog lover, so.
Oh yeah, he's the best. He just loves to play ball, and he's the freaking cutest dog ever.
I bet.
So yeah, I wasn't paying attention. Did you answer the question?
I was about to.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I think it's a culmination of the both to answer that question is that it's both life, people who are from the live stream and also more like defenders of the live stream being used. And then also some of those souls that are restless being used. I think that's a really interesting point because without destroying my own theory, I think that looking at it from the perspective of those who belong outside of the live stream is a better bet. But that doesn't necessarily contain everybody related to geostigma either. It could just be people who are like restless souls as well.
Right.
I think that's more of, I would tend to agree with that more than even my own past theory.
Or they could just be like, I don't know. It could be like, that's just their job. You know, you died and this is your job now. You are a ghost. You are a ghost that's supposed to keep the timeline in, you know,
it seems like
check.
A function of just the live stream in general. So you could, now I'm jumping back. I agree with my own theory.
No, it's just like,
I think that it could be either that.
It could be something because it doesn't make sense for all the whispers to be corrupted because from what we can understand is, you know, if Biggs comes back to life because he was a whisper, then, you know, Biggs wasn't corrupted. He seemed like a pretty cool dude. Like he wasn't evil by any means. He wasn't corrupted. He seemed like he had a good head on his shoulders. Like
right.
he's not, you know, he seems like he got life figured out. And so same thing with Jesse, you know? And so
I think that ironically, I think that from you being distracted at the beginning of this conversation to getting to the end of this question, I think you're absolutely right. I couldn't have answered it any better than that. So
there you go. Moving on, still with Takafumi. What are your thoughts on the lyrical content of Hollow?
I was under the same impression of it at first being associated with Zach. But now knowing that it's more associated with Cloud, just based off of Uematsu's interview about it, he said that it was about Cloud. I think it's about both now, and I'm not.
Well, they're technically two halves of the same coin.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
They're very similar. Their stories kind of can line up in similar ways. But I think that taking a note from what I've already said is that multiple meanings. So I think that it could be referring to multiple characters. So I think it refers to both of them.
Do you think the Void will play a part in the future?
I saw that question and I was debating whether or not the Void that is being discussed is a part of Dirge. And if I'm wrong, I'm sorry, but I think that that's what you're talking about. I do think that there's something about that that's interesting. So in Dirge of Cerberus, Nero opens a portal and you kind of enter into this other world. There's a lot of interesting stuff in that area in his boss fight that I cannot explain at all, but it's definitely something really interesting to like think about. If that's the Void that you're referring to, or the prison that Shulk is in, different game series, too similar though. Shulk is in the Void as well. I think that could absolutely come into play at some point. We'll have to see though, because that's also an unexplained element of Dirge that is super interesting. But thank you for asking that question. I would love to see it though.
Okay. We're on to Zoran Lightning on Reddit says, First of all, good job on your videos, and thank you for doing them. More FF7 content is always awesome, especially when the quality is there, so thanks. My wish would be an analysis on Aerith saying Sephiroth hates the world and everything connected to it because he is all alone. He doesn't see the good moments. Is it another clue in the ever-going topic of Sephiroth or Genova? Who is really in charge? Does it mean Lucretia being alive might come in handy? Figure of mother being so important in the series, and she is a unique case of crystallized human being with Genova cells. To what end? Will it expand Vincent's role in Final Fantasy VII? That is what I like. That was what I'd like to focus on, if possible. Thank you.
Wow, that's a lot to chew on.
Yeah.
From what I'm going to try and take pieces of that. And answer it.
The first part is Aerith saying Sephiroth hates the world and stuff.
So I do think that that's interesting. I actually wanted to bring that up in the last question is that it's the depiction of Sephiroth or Genova, because Aerith, and I was thinking about this during that question, is that Aerith doesn't clarify that. I guess she does kind of clarify that she's talking about Sephiroth. Is that like these things just kind of roll off of his shoulders, and there's this like kind of vinegar and oil depiction of like Sephiroth, that he is so far removed as far as a life form is concerned that nothing that the Whispers can do actually affect him, because whatever he represents, or whatever he has done or has become, is so opposite to the forces of the life stream that he's just able to resist. I think this idea of loneliness kind of plays into your next part of the question with Lucretia and the mother figure again, whereas that sort of depiction of Sephiroth has been happening a lot too, because he finds that connection in Genova rather than his actual mother. I'm sure that if you wanted to humanize that character, going to Lucretia would be an interesting thing, because there's a lot more interesting dialogue in the original game that Lucretia has, as far as like how she thinks of Sephiroth, and like also she wanted to see him as a child. She never got to. Hojo just immediately takes Sephiroth away from her. Mm-hmm. A lot of issues there, I'm imagining, with Sephiroth in general. But I think if there was a way to humanize the character or involve Lucretia, I think that subject could be very interesting, or even hints at her. And yes, her being in a crystal period is one of the strangest things that I've been really reluctant to go into in my theory videos, because there's so much to speculate on and not a lot of fact that I can find, or that like a structure there. I do think that she's super interesting to talk about, though. Would like to see more information on that come up.
Yeah. Will it expand Vincent's role in any way, you think?
I think Vincent, just by virtue of having the proto-materia inside of him for most of, if not like all of him being Vincent as we know him in Final Fantasy VII, I think that there's going to be a lot more interesting dialogue between him and what the proto-materia might be. He doesn't know about it in Final Fantasy VII. Also, him being a Turk is also going to be super exciting to look forward to in the future. Is his involvement, his past.
That's right. He was a Turk. I totally forgot about that.
It's a weird thing. It's a weird part of his character that I wasn't even really too familiar with when I first played Final Fantasy VII, because I didn't do a lot of that stuff. But yeah, so his involvement with the Turks, proto-materia, I think he's going to be like other characters that we've already seen. Like even Aerith has gotten so much expansion just in this one game alone. Like there's like, she used to kind of be like a Deus Ex, right? Like
right,
she represented like this one plot element, and it sucked when she died and it was heartbreaking. But like in this game, I thought I was like a Tifa lover. Like I was on fanboy Tifa.
Yeah, I mean you can go back and forth. Like Tifa is there for like, you know, like kind of like eye candy, you know, and she's like super awesome and sporty. And then you have Aerith, it's like, oh, you're sweet. I could, you know.
I just love how weird she is. She's just amazingly weird, and I love it. And she's so sweet. And I also think that this whole like crisis of like faith that she's having with like the yellow flowers just makes her character like infinitely more interesting. So I think we should be expecting all of these characters to get that level of expansion.
Yeah. One thing I will say about this entire game, Final Fantasy VII Remake, is like it's probably the best localization from a Japanese story to an American, and for an American audience or, Western audience to watch it and like really get involved with the characters and how they talk with and converse with one another. I think it's the best that I've seen in a long time. Like, and the voice acting really helped with that too. That's that's a part of the localization, because you want the characters to like act like real friggin' people and not just like
robots,
like Resident Evil 1 on the the PlayStation 1,
sandwiches.
Like Barrett, where Barry walks in and he just they're in this weird freaking haunted mansion and he goes, "What is this?" That's not how you say "what is this." You walk into a creepy mansion after you just chased by a bunch of zombie dogs. You just go, "What the fuck is going on?"
Hitting the fan. You have a mental breakdown for an hour.
Yeah, you freak the frick out because shit's happening and you're like, I don't know what the fuck's going on.
I don't even know what. I would go to the campfire or the fireplace. I would just sit down. There's probably bottles of booze on that table in that dining room. I'm down.
Accept your fate, man.
Let me think about this. I need to chill out for maybe a good 20 minutes. Just give me a break, Barry. All right?
Just give me a break.
We don't know what's in there.
Sit down, Barry. We're not going to that
splitting
hallway.
Up and looking for clues, that's for sure.
Don't you watch Scooby-Doo?
Exactly.
All right, so continuing on to I'm going to try and pronounce this correctly. Inzivivo. Sorry. He says, I like this. I like how he starts this out. All right, pal.
Oh, God.
I'd be really interested to hear your take on the ending, the function of the Harbinger, and potential multiple realities in light of the following. Number one, stamp packet is proven to not have been changed between Zack's scene and the events of Remake. In the Shinra building, Beagle Stamp is pictured on one of Aerith's childhood books. This room has remained untouched for 15 years, according to Nojima's new short story, Investigation Unit with the Painting. So that would make the idea of a logo change unlikely. Considering the scene when Zack arrives at Midgar a couple of months before the events of Remake at most, but it's more likely weeks. So the stamp packet clearly indicates a number of timeline changes were made years prior to Zack's scene. That's the second point. And the third point, the symbolism of the fact... before I get into that, do you have anything to say about what I just said the first time? That's a lot.
Yeah. So I always thought that was the most interesting thing that people found that I was just completely unaware of and not being very observant about is the whole stamp thing. That definitely is some interesting stuff. I'm glad that to know now, because I read that post before we started, that there's just more evidence to support the fact that it's just two separate stamps, from what I understand of what he's saying. I have purposefully completely avoided talking about the time travel elements of Zack,
because that's what most people are talking about right now, and that's the thing that's most in your face.
It's super. I think it's also, it requires. There's a really good video about this that isn't I didn't want to touch it because I thought that this guy did such a good job, and I'm actually trying to find the video right now just to mention this guy's name. I think his name is Jesse Passmore. And his video is super, super in depth with the idea of what a singularity is. And I subscribe completely to his observation that what is happening is a singularity, a bubble of events over Midgar, which is the way that it's depicted at the end. And maybe that bubble bursting. The reason I don't talk about it is because time travel already hurts my head.
Yeah, that's a whole different that's a whole different rabbit hole, because time travel, you can go by so many different rules. You got Back to the Future rules, you got butterfly effect rules, you got what other, there's thousands of different rules, rule books when it comes to time travel. And
I do think it is interesting to say that, obviously that this is a huge part of this new story is Zack coming back and having some sort of effect on the story. if I had to say anything about it, I think that obviously, not obviously, but in my opinion, they're setting him up for an involvement in this core story.
It's entirely possible that they're setting him up to make his own game.
Right.
Too.
Yeah.
Just to bring the character back because he's such a cool character. You know, they could be going the Kingdom Hearts route where, I mean, they don't have a mobile game exactly, but they could just say, you know, in the Square Enix studio, or just pass the IP to another company and say, hey, make this game. Because we don't have time. We're making this other stuff, but make, you know, Zach's story over here. And so we can make some more money.
If I wanted to be like a really like big money grubber, like on this series, which like, let's be honest, probably going to happen a little bit with some DLC, but like looking past that, I think if I really wanted to get into that Zach stuff, what I would do is re-release Crisis Core in a new engine, make it look really nice, and then make DLC for that game, the ending of Remake.
Oh shit.
Of Zach's timeline. I would love to see this expansion from Crisis Core's events and the telling of that story, and like really get into Zach stuff outside of the Remake stuff.
One thing that I did read about the problem with them actually even remastering Crisis Core for another is Genesis, because he's modeled after a real fucking person, which great idea, guys. Good job, guys. Way to completely screw up an entire game because you decided to use some pop star. Fantastic.
Right. You guys should have known that this is going to come back and bite you in the butt so
hard.
I
mean, you know, they thought it was a cool idea at the time. It's like, yeah, let's have Lady Gaga of Japan come and, you know, be our guy.
Right.
You're a very big part of one of our games, and it's actually a very big part of the entire compile. And so
let's go ahead and share the rights. Let's do that. That sounds like a great
wonder if they can, you know, either, you know, use the rights and the person can actually let them use his likeness, or because I don't know the laws in Japan, it might be different than American laws, but it's entirely possible too. They could just redesign him and just make him completely different and just figure out some way to tell story wise, be like, look, now he's different because he wasn't accepted by Minerva, and you know, whatever.
Something has changed, right? I've heard that that perception, and I think that would be like the most like not satisfying, but like the most logical leap into like including Genesis. A lot of people have brought up that Roach would be like a really good way to fill that role, just with the introduction of a new soldier that doesn't have any background in the original game, could very easily be used to fill the hole that Genesis might like, or just to get into the subject of G cells. They could have used him. I really think that they're going to just use Genesis. And I've been hearing a lot about like this copyright issue. I know and the only reason I'm feeling a little bit more optimistic about it now is because somebody shared with me that Genesis was actually in a mobile game recently, a World of Final Fantasy sort of deal where it's just like an eclectic.
Okay. You know, well, then that debunks the whole theory that they can't use him.
I think it's the debate is whether or not they want to include him
because they'd have to pay him
licensing, right?
Because now you're dealing with business.
I think they will have no problem shelling out a little bit of that money to that guy just to use him, because I think even as there's as much people that hate Genesis, I think that like I'm maybe in the minority of this discussion. I really want to see that character make a redemption in a depiction in Remake that maybe gives him a little less of, maybe not shed or depict him in the way that he is in Crisis Core, but I think that character could be so impactful in this story.
When a lot of people bring up they hate Genesis, like I just recently played Crisis Core for the first time, and I didn't mind him. It's not my favorite character. It's not my favorite depiction of a villain, but it was interesting enough to be like, you know, he's an interesting character. I feel like, you know, he's a flawed character. He's not villainous. You know, he's not like Sephiroth in that he's just fucking evil to be evil. Like, no, there's something else.
He's kind of a grounded character. In a lot of ways. Like he's adopted. He gets these Genova cells, and he's not as functional as a. I thought that this was super interesting. Is that the reason why like this sort of degradation starts to happen is just from a cut, like a simple cut in the VR training session, is when he gets cut on the shoulder in that session, that like scene ends in Crisis Core. That's one of the reasons why he ends up, his body isn't recovering properly. And that's when I think he finds out that he's not really the perfect soldier. He's actually probably the most flawed of the group. And that's interesting. And then also, apparently, just from the ending of Crisis Core, or at least Genesis's involvement in the story, is that he seems to be aware of future events in some way. And that I only say that because there's a line in Crisis Core after you defeat him in the final battle where he recites Loveless, and something clicks in Zack's head, and he says, "So you knew about this from the beginning." And Genesis just completely stops. Like, he doesn't elaborate on that, and he just says, like, this is like, now, like, you know, bring back my honor by fighting me, essentially. And then it's just never touched on again. But that's the one moment where I'm like, this character seems to have some foresight. And the reason why he's reciting Loveless is because there's something in that story that has allowed him to sort of figure out, at least up until this point. I mean, he was right about Minerva, like the gift of the goddess. He gets cured. There's a lot of things that happen in like that just single event that is mind-blowing. Also, Minerva shows up, period. And she hasn't shown up since then to one person. So that's kind of important.
Yeah. Let's move on here. It's starting to get dark.
I know. I'm
We've
so
got
sorry.
for 2 hours. No, that's fine.
I was literally thinking to myself, I was like, thank God he started with the questions, because I didn't expect it to be.
I mean, we could talk about Final Fantasy VII Remake for hours. That's what's great about, you know, the direction that they're taking, because we can have conversations like this, and this is what keeps the game alive. You know, the game's been released for like a month and a half now, and we're still talking about it as if it was just released. Like, we're just so still excited about it.
I'm definitely pumped. I'm going to try and keep that energy up.
The third point to the last question here was, I think it's a question. I don't think it's a question, but he's adding on to his original point here. The symbolism of the fact that Midgar's propaganda symbol changed from a beagle in our timeline. Beagles are hunting dogs. They are ruthless in their ability to track down prey. They are intelligent and always the hunter. To a border terrier in Zack's scene, terriers are known to be stubborn, proud, and territorial. They're defensive by nature. And also the fact that the design of Midgar appears to be different in Zack's scene and looks more complete, like the fortress bunker fitting in with the border terrier symbolism. Thanks, you super sloth, for this find.
That is super interesting,
right?
To think that the Midgar that Zack is going to is not. That was always something that bothered me about it. Is that I never really, and I'm not trying to avoid thinking about it in this way, but one of the things that I would personally dislike to see is for Zack to somehow just integrate himself into the timeline that we're already seeing. I really do kind of want that timeline to be separate in just my own wants. But I think, first of all, looking at the dogs and like seeing like what their breed is associated with is like insanely awesome. And I would have never thought to go there, but that's super interesting. Yeah. Add something to that and say that on my second or third playthrough, I started noticing that there are posters for a stamp movie, and one beagle is over has thrown over the shoulder on his back, technically, another beagle. And he's got dirt on his face, and it's like he's going to see it through to the end or something, like a really odd catchphrase. And I was like, if this beagle, and here's the funny thing is that the beagle is actually associated with Cloud from the very beginning of the game. Barrett makes fun of Cloud for being a puppy dog. And then he's associating him with Stamp. That he's just like you're just a propaganda soldier and you're just buying in all their crap. And like, you're just like one of those military like minds who just is a sheep. So when I saw that poster, I was like, is that like Zack and like Cloud being depicted right now? And at the end,
shit,
where he's over the shoulder. And I was like, I haven't looked at it any farther than that, but that was like one of the first things that I saw after hearing about the stamp thing. I think that the depiction that you're bringing up though in that question is super interesting. I think that it's entirely possible that based off of what we're finding out with the breed of the dog, that yes, there could be a different depiction of what Midgar is in Zach's alternate timeline. And I think that would be such an interesting way to take that idea.
Again,
that I didn't think about.
It'd be cool again, like if they go the route where you said, where they make, they re-release Crisis Core in fully HD version, and then add on top of it, and then release basically a sequel, and or maybe because it's hard
like
for
a
me.
DLC for me.
It's hard for me to.
Here's the money that we want.
It's hard for me to think that they can fit this whole new universe in with the entire Final Fantasy VII universe. Like Final Fantasy VII, that's a huge game. There's so much to do. You can spend 100 hours playing that game. And so
you're absolutely right.
How the hell are they going to be able to fit in a brand new Midgar, a brand new characters now, because the timeline is completely different now, or it might be just not timeline. It might just be another universe. It might just be another completely different.
Yeah.
They might do the multiverse theory instead of timeline stuff. Multiverse theory is every choice that has ever happened has already happened and happened different ways, and it's you're getting into freaking physics or quantum physics, and you're well, okay, this is.
Yeah, this is getting crazy. And I'm 100% on the same page with you on that, just because I think there's a part of my brain that goes to a cynical place, because you were talking about a label at the beginning of this, and I'm actually going to bring that back, because I've been dealt with executives before, talking to them about ideas and things like that. And from that perspective, and then being an artist, there's a difference, and it's not a bad difference. They obviously just want the health of their company to be strong. They want them to be properly represented. As an artist, obviously, there's a lot of contradictions that creates with an idea sometimes.
Well, it becomes an adversarial.
Yeah,
because there's two different philosophies going. I'm an artist. I just want to put my art out there, and art's what's most important. But then you have the business guy saying well, yeah, I mean, art is important, but
how do we make money off of this?
Yeah, how do we pay you?
Right, exactly.
How am I going to pay you if your art sucks?
Right, or it's just not marketable, or not the way that we want it to be, or this and that, any number of small details. So my cynical brain goes to Kingdom Hearts, and I hate to say that because I know that they're fans of it. I just got burned by the series by the fact that they were releasing the game on so many different consoles that were necessary to tell the story that I wanted to know about, and I couldn't play them. So a PSP title, a Game Boy Advance title, a 3DS title, I didn't have and it's ridiculous to ask your audience to be buying all these different systems to be included in a story that you're invested in.
Right. And I guess
that was a really cheapening of the idea of what Kingdom Hearts.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a really good point, and it kind of mirrors the point I made earlier about that is an objectively true criticism. And it's not necessarily Nomura's fault. It could just be how Square Enix is this huge company.
It's here's a license that we bought for the 3DS. Now you got to go make a game,
right?
For Kingdom
and they're
Hearts.
well, we have this story, and we wanted to make it 7 parts, and then the company looks at them and goes, no, you're not going to make 7 games for the PlayStation 2. You're going to make, two games for the PlayStation 2, and the rest you can make GBA titles.
Right.
That's the only way we can financially make this feasible. And that kind of sucks. That kind of sucks for the fan of that particular story, because again, you're just you get lost. And one way they circumvent that in the Kingdom Hearts, to their defense, is after playing from 2 to 3, is that the way that 2 picks off is that Sora doesn't have any clue what's going on, and it sort of mirrors what the player is feeling. But the player, the cool part is that if you did play the other games, you know what's going on, but Sora doesn't, and so that gives you a little bit of leverage over Sora, the main character. But if you didn't, like I did, I was right there with Sora the entire time, what the hell is going on? Sora, can you tell me? And Sora would look at me and go, no, I have no idea what's going on, but let's go. And then you go on the adventure with Goofy and Donald, and then there you go. And so
I definitely agree with that point too, which is that, see, this is where I see a contradiction that I'm making, and I'm being a hypocrite for saying so, because I think that the lore of Final Fantasy VII Remake is more interesting to me on that aspect
right.
than the Kingdom Hearts. Even though they're doing something very similar, it looks like. I'm not saying that they are, but from what has been said of future remake titles is pieces coming out rather than bigger chunks. I think that helps the story, but I also think that that's kind of falling back onto a Kingdom Hearts sort of franchise formula.
It's entirely
seems to have worked for them, but I think it could be entirely possible that that's like maybe my worries are, moot because it could all just come out for the PS5.
Yeah, it could be it could just be short DLC items too, right. Because that's one way they can make money. Because like, hey, this is Zach's story. It's $15. Buy it, and then we'll buy it. I'll buy it. It's like $15. Hell yeah, I'll buy it for $30. I'm going to be
excluded from this at this point.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So you can take the wallet.
Yeah, exactly.
Buy the season pass.
And that's not predatory at all because that's a thing with it depends on how long it is. If it's like 5 minutes and you're like fucking 15 minutes or 5 minutes, how dare you? But I have faith that, and this is my cautiously optimistic brain going.
I'm with you.
It's like I feel like they're going to pay off Zach in a good way because I say in my review that Zach's ending, he's sort of he's a character in the original Final Fantasy VII, and he's like, here's this guy that Cloud thinks he is, and you're like, okay, and then Crisis Core comes out, and Zach's gonna die, and so that point comes up, and you're like, you're sad because it's gonna happen, and it happens, and you're sad, but at the same time you're like, there's something missing here. His death needs more meaning, at least with Aerith, Aerith dying, it comes out of nowhere and you're sad, you're depressed, but it does have meaning in the end because she's the one that helped stop Meteor.
So maybe this is something that you can maybe help me with, because maybe it's just my knowledge of things being a little off. But from what I remember, and I agree with you, like there's so much more fleshing out with like Crisis Core and Zack, and the impact of his death is like so much bigger. And I talk about that in my video as well, where it's like the meaning of him being alive is now to put into context a different meaning for what Zack represents in Remake now for Cloud and Aerith. But and this is just a thought that just came to me is that one of the key differences between the end scene in Crisis Core and the end scene in Remake with Zack is that there are considerably less soldiers in Zack's timeline than there is in Crisis Core. So are things already different in that flashback?
I didn't notice that.
I'm so new to like talking about like that like openly, so I'm not sure if people have already caught up to that or not. But it seems like things are already different, and it's not really the Whisper's involvement that they could have helped it along for him to survive. But it just seems right away that there's something different, and also the sword is different. So maybe that's just already. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, You mean again, like these are the whole Zack thing. You can make hours and hours of content of theory and trying to figure out just on the timeline stuff alone. Not to mention the stuff that he's a bigger picture of the entire compilation. Anyway, let's go on to we only have 2 more questions, dude. We're almost there. We're almost done. Way.
I'm sorry to hold you down for this long.
No, dude, like we're on it. We're good. It's still daylight.
It's not 2 days later.
It's not 2 days later.
I haven't ran out of rations. I still got 1 bottle of water and
I had 1 water and 1 tea, and they're both empty. So
yeah, you and me both. I ran out like half an hour.
And eventually, soon, I'm going to have to go to the bathroom. So here we go. It is mentioned. This is an unknown person on YouTube. This is the one you sent me on Twitter.
Oh yeah.
And you're like, we don't know who this guy is. It's the comment's gone now. So it could be a rogue developer, just like kind of like
posted it,
or you could have.
I want to ask myself some questions.
Look at that, producer Ashley to the rescue. Thank you so much, baby.
Thank you, Ash.
So it is mentioned that the end of Loveless had different endings based on interpretation. Does this imply different endings for Remake, or at least more ambiguous ending than the original?
Oh, yeah. Yes. I don't know I think that having multiple endings would be very difficult to pull off in the grander scheme of things. Like Aerith's death does not necessarily come at a point where like think about that impact, right? You get to choose her living and her dying. That is you making a completely separate game, it feels like, to make that happen if you choose to save her or to choose to not save her. Like two completely different branching off points.
Well, one thing that I can't reconcile for the saving Aerith camp, because now it's divided into two camps, because the whole remake has kind of blown up this conversation again, is like, is she going to live or is she going to die? It's entirely possible that Sephiroth does not want to kill Aerith because, well, actually, no, because you say in your video that he doesn't remember now after the events of Remake. He severs destiny.
I don't. Yeah, that's still something that even I'm like not sure about. But there's a moment where he gathers his memories through Meteor, but then he resummons Meteor. So I don't think that the Sephiroth we fight at the end is the same Sephiroth that we're dealing with at the very end of Remake. So it's hard to tell. I think that it's open for debate what you're saying.
Well, here's the So if you take the side of like Sephiroth understands what he has done in the first game, and what we're facing is a more powerful Advent Children Sephiroth that has all the knowledge of the Earth and the cosmos.
Yeah, some bigger pool of knowledge.
He would probably, it would be logical to think that he doesn't want to kill Aerith because that's what doomed him last time.
Right. That's the thing that's been weirding me out. And I've been trying mostly out of not the destruction of my own perception of what's going on, which is a bad sign already. But I think that thought is super interesting, is that how things play out because she dies for Sephiroth might not be as good as they would play out if she lived. The thing that bothers me is that Sephiroth could just easily hold Holy back whether or not she's alive or not. He can decide that, right? Whether or not she lives or dies. Her summoning Meteor or her summoning Holy happens, and then Sephiroth already has the plan in place to just hold it. So he's like, whether this lady lives or dies, I've already got her plan on lockdown with this. I've already barricaded Holy.
Interesting.
What is super weird to me is that Holy, as I mentioned in part 3, is, and it's pretty public knowledge from just the original 7, but the Holy's activation could potentially eliminate all of life on all of humanity in the original 7. One of the reasons why we don't necessarily get to see that play out in a less ambiguous way is because of the way that Final Fantasy VII ends. And then we also know that eventually AC happens. So there is, I think, whatever is happening definitely centers around like the use of Holy, how that plays out, how is that involved with a cycle, and whether or not like AC is even something that's relevant was the point to just avoid going AC for Sephiroth. So is that because of Aerith living or dying? I'm not entirely sure. Maybe there are other ways around it.
The one thing I will say about the thing that makes me keep going back to like she's going to die is that I can't think of a way to write Final Fantasy VII, the story, without her death, because it's such an impactful moment in the story. I don't know how else you would substitute it. And it still hit. Other than, I mean, it's entirely possible you could do like a switcheroo and Cloud sacrifices himself. And then now, Aerith takes on the mantle to avenge Cloud, and you could do it that way. But again, I think that'd be too different. That would be and then you really have a pissed off fan base if you went that route. Yeah. So I think the safer route is to make to shield yourself from the hatred of the fan base, because it's there. It's there just waiting, because
we're like an Armageddon of fans. So if you want your company
exactly, they will revolt against everything that you put out, and if you fuck up Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2 and 3, it's kind of crazy, but we're here. We're at this point, and I think we're going to be safe in knowing that they're gonna write Final Fantasy VII Remake. They're gonna hit the beats. It's just the same. I think it'd be easier for the developers too, because they don't have to go all this crazy nonsense and think of new ways to make things, hit the same. If they're remaking a game, it makes it easier for you to develop a game because the story's already made for you. You don't have to really worry about the story that much anymore. As I'd imagine that making a brand new story. If you're making a brand new story, that takes a lot longer, I imagine, as opposed to kind of retooling one that already exists.
Yeah. I think that was like the compromise that they might have made, and this is my assumption, but I think what they figured is that let's just add on to the context. So we don't have to have everything happen exactly the same, but every story beat matters, and we should retain that. They even say that like they didn't want to cut out locations for Remake as they pertain to Final Fantasy VII because they thought that it was too much of an essential element to not include all of the things that like we already know. So that already indicates to me it's like that's definitely something that they're keeping in mind. I just think that the way that we get there is going to be interesting.
And I think too,
Aerith is going to die as well. So
yeah, and I think too, a lot of the developers that are making this game, and even the American localization, you can tell that I believe the voice actress for Aerith streams video games.
Yeah,
I keep seeing her
out a couple times.
Have you? Okay, so like we have people that have grown up with this game, so they are able to communicate. If the Square Enix was smart and said, what was the things about Final Fantasy VII that was important to you, and you can get a poll from like all these people who work on games. And they're passionate about it, and they're passionate about Final Fantasy VII. You can see that when you're playing Remake. That's why it's so good, because the people who it's not only the original people that worked on the game, like Nomura and Uematsu. Well, Uematsu to a lesser extent, but like the pieces are there. But then you also have people who actually grew up appreciating what this game was. And they get to throw in, it's exciting for them because they're now a part of the game that they grew up loving.
I think that like is a huge factor to this, is that the fans are now people who joined the industry because of this game are now working on it.
Right.
In some capacity, or people who just love the game in general. And I think that's also why it's been important to like look at the compilation too, is because people have grown up thinking about these games and being like, oh, now that we're remaking this, I want to be that Crisis Core fan that's working on this game and put as much of that into this. Yeah. And I'm an OG fan, but like them all working together to like stitch together this like amazing like love letter, as I've described before, to the fans.
Yeah, I think Final Fantasy VII Remake is nothing but a love letter to everyone who's appreciated the game. Okay, are you ready for the last question?
Yes. I am like listening to my voice now. I'm like, I know. I've become like 30 years older talking this long.
Just coughing. All right, here we go. Chris Abbott, you are the winner. Chris Abbott 7, sorry. Assuming everything that's been deduced thus far is correct, do you think Sephiroth could theoretically have traveled back to any point in time? Him choosing the onset of Final Fantasy VII on his destination certainly makes sense, but do we think there is anything beyond utility, both in-universe and out, that informed the choice?
Yeah, this is a good question. And this is another subject that I try to not particularly avoid, but it just becomes very complicated very fast, is that the live stream has so many uses, like even before Remake, and the way that time, like the integration of time in Remake to the live stream is such a huge implication. This is like, just as an example, we know that Mako that is used by Shinra does not rejoin the planet. Once it's used, it disappears. So then thinking about that concept for just a second, what happens to time itself if you are like burning time essentially? So if what we're talking about, fate, time, and is all going through the live stream, and you're burning that as fuel, that means that the live stream on the planet, I'm imagining, is shrinking over time. like, and you could talk about that in different cycles, different times being implemented into that concept. That's how complicated this becomes.
Interesting.
You could sell it as time has gotten shorter as just like other time periods, because we know that the live stream could be connected to different, like, times, places, all sorts of things. So the conversation of time travel becomes, or just a live stream in general, becomes so convoluted so quickly. I think.
Well, sorry, I'm going to enter. If what you said is true, where Mako is being taken out and you're essentially burning time, that would essentially mean that you're weakening the live stream, and that's probably why Sephiroth chose that time specifically, because Midgar is still in its like big, huge phase where it's taking all this, Mako and just sucking up life from the, where Barrett talks about it all the time. He's like, they're sucking life from the planet, know, and so maybe that has something to do with the timing that Sephiroth chose. So like, oh, this is the perfect time for me to be as powerful as possible in this moment, because the live stream is just weak enough that I can, insert myself here.
That's true. That's a good point. I like the idea that yeah. And I also think that like Aerith not knowing about the whispers is a good thing for him at that particular point. I also think that Cloud being infected with his cells, is also super important to like the moment in time. We can tell like right away after Sephiroth shows up in Remake that like Cloud is just immediately having difficulty controlling himself already, not just with like memories, but like physically, his hand not like being like twitchy and all this other stuff. A lot of people pointed out to me that that's the same hand that he uses to hand the black materia to Sephiroth later. Two things I'm going to mention really quickly is that I think that something that people should look at, or maybe like something that people can talk to me about later, is that the whispers in the last scene with Sephiroth before they go through the portal, seemingly the big cloud of whispers that comes out of the Shinra building is coming out of the hole in the top of the reactor. So if that's the case, and I'm not sure about that, but that's what it looks like to me, and that's not something I've checked into that deeply, but it seems like if the whispers are coming from anywhere, they're coming from like the core of the planet, or wherever the source of Mako is from that Shinra is pulling from, because it seems to be coming out of the middle reactor, which is also interesting because I think the Mako Zero, where Deep Ground's reactor is, that could also be something. I don't know. And then I forgot the other part of the question because
I think that was it. I think that was the
good.
I think travel back to. Oh yeah. Do you think Sephiroth could theoretically have traveled back to any point in time? Him choosing nonsense. Do we think there's anything beyond utility that involved the choice?
I don't know. I think it mainly has to do with just the convenience of like the pieces are in place. Aerith is there, Cloud is there, Midgar, which is important because of Meteor's involvement, and also Cloud is infected with S cells. I think all of those factors together kind of and Aerith's power/ignorance of the situation in certain ways makes it like a prime candidate.
Right. Also, you really wouldn't have a story.
I was about to say,
if you chose any other time, like I guess technically he could go back to Crisis Core and be a good guy again. But why would that? That's not fun.
Yeah, it's not. And I agree. Is that there has to be some level of like
suspension of disbelief.
Exactly. Somebody mentioned is like, well, if Sephiroth is connected to Cloud, wouldn't Cloud just need to kill himself in order to like stop the story? I was like, yeah, but then like you don't get the original Final Fantasy VII either. So like you're
right. It's not going to be 100% logical. Yeah. We can shoot for 90. We can shoot for 90% logical, right, and 10% what the hell. It's
fantasy. And the point of fantasy is just to make the struggles of these characters, and this is my own interpretation of fantasy, make the emotional struggle into a physical manifestation of a problem, of an emotional problem, right, and also giving it like a power larger than life. So don't take it too seriously, but that doesn't mean that you can't tell like an extremely emotional story. But I think, and I mean, this is hypocritical of me to say, but don't look that far.
Look, just don't do what I do.
Yeah, exactly. Essentially, don't
just sit back and have fun. Which, you know, my first playthrough of the game, like, I didn't see any of this. I just played it, and when I finished the game, I was like, that ending was freaking cool. Like that,
Same.
it was just cool. Like, I don't know what any of it means, but it's cool. And then I listened to the Easy Allies podcast. I'm like, holy shit, there is meaning to this shit. And then I played it again, and then knowing all that, and then playing Crisis Core too, because I was like excited to play Crisis Core now, after playing it for the first time. But yeah, I think, man, I cannot be more happy with the direction and the game, where it's going. Like, I can't be more happy.
I'm super stoked about it myself. I didn't start, like, I was excited for future titles, but like after doing this research and making these theory videos, like, I am just like 100%. Like, and it doesn't have to be right. Like, I don't have to be right in order for me to enjoy these games. But like, from what I've seen, there's just so much that they could do with it. And if they handle it correctly, I think that we're going to get another masterpiece, honestly.
Yeah. So, I think as long as they maintain the same philosophy what they did with the first game, then, man, I'll buy everything. I'll buy it all. I'll buy all the side stories. I'll buy all the DLC. You got me, man. They totally got me. All right, dude. I think we're at 3 hours. I think we're at 3 hours. Okay, so hang on. It's 2 hours and 30 minutes. No, this is great. This is exactly what I wanted, because there's no way we could have gotten through all of that and be under an hour. There's no way. There's no way.
This is how my videos go. It'll be under an hour.
Exactly. Like,
it'll be under an hour.
And this is free form, so it's going to be even longer. But yeah, dude, like, thank you so much for doing this, man, because this was so fun to just like nerd out with someone who has is able to retain all this knowledge. Even by just talking with you, I'm just like amazed by. You said you didn't even play the games recently, and so you actually just went and just connected the dots and are able to retain that information. And not everyone can do that. You know, I certainly can't. Like, I'll probably wake up tomorrow and go, what the hell did we talk about last night?
I can't remember what we talked about like 15 minutes ago, so maybe we're more like on that space.
But it is impressive, like, the amount of threading of the needle that you can do and retain all the information. So that's super cool. And this was a lot of fun.
It was super fun for me as well. And I really appreciate you going out of your way to ask me to be a part of this, because after watching like your videos, I was like, this is exactly the guy I wanted to talk to. And I didn't realize that was going to come up in the way that it did, but it was super awesome that you contacted me, and this has been so awesome. I've enjoyed it thoroughly.
Dude, and congratulations on the videos, and congratulations on all the reception. It's just going to get bigger. It's just going to get bigger from here. You have now inserted yourself as a what's the word I'm looking for? As a staple in this entire Final Fantasy VII Remake community, and that's not an easy feat, man. You did it. So here we are, and I thank you so much for coming on here. For those who haven't watched his videos, please do. I mean, if you haven't watched these videos and you're still listening to this, like, what are you doing? Who are you? You need to what?
I don't know.
You know, you can. So where can we expect the next part coming soon?
Yes, I usually take a week off after posting these videos to just like relax a little bit. I can't even if I tried to try and write down some stuff, but after this conversation, I'm definitely feeling a little bit of a fire to get on that. But I'd also like to say 100%, you guys are already on his channel. So I advise you all to go check out some of the other content. I also really liked your Final Fantasy VII Remake review, your expanded thoughts, and I would recommend that. And I'd also like to ask you just one question, because it's been on my mind
the
entire conversation, is where on earth did you get that Buster Sword?
The Buster, hang on. Let's just check it out. There it is.
That's so sick.
That's all metal, by the way.
No way.
It's like 50 pounds, that damn thing. So here's the story. I was in Gatlinburg. Gatlinburg is this like sort of touristy kind of town right outside of Nashville, about 3 hours outside of Nashville. And it's just, you rent a cabin and it's got like, you got rides. It's sort of like this might offend some people. It's sort of like a redneck Disneyland. Okay. You got yourself a tram. You got, there's like whiskey tasting. It's like really cool. It's a really fun town. But, there was a time where every year we would rent a cabin and all go out. And in Gatlinburg, there are tons of weapon stores. And, not like guns, but freaking, like airsoft guns, BB guns, and swords, and a ton of swords. And there's a ton of stores. Like there's like 7 on the street. It's like ridiculous.
That's awesome.
And so one trip to Gatlinburg, we were all out, walking, having fun. And we all went into many of these stores, and we all bought a weapon. Like, I think the girls got like a cat, a cat thing that you can put on your keychain.
Ooh.
And it had 2 pointers sticking out, so you can hold it with your knuckles. So it's kind of like brass knuckles, but but there's plastic. It was really hard plastic and really sharp at the end. So if someone was, some guy was trying to mug you,
you'd just be able to pull it out.
What did you get at Gatlinburg? Sorry, like
no, I'm interested.
Oh, a knife with a panther on it. That's what it was.
That is like some sacrificial shit right there.
Where did you get the kitty cat then? Oh, it doesn't matter.
What rituals are you guys performing in Nashville? And if you guys need another robed sacrifice, I'm totally game. I got my robe over here.
So my best friend Kyle, he bought that for me. He saw me like I didn't have the money. Awesome. I didn't have the money to get it because it's like $150, and he's like, dude, that's my fucking Buster Sword for Final Fantasy 7. I want it so bad. And he's like, here, you'll pay me back later. I don't know if I ever did, but
it all paid off though.
Or was it my birthday? I feel like it was my birthday.
If early it was your birthday present, then that's like the sickest.
I feel like it was an early birthday present. I can't remember, but that's the story of the Buster Sword.
That's awesome. Well, I'm glad that it's got a very, very perfect place on your shelf, and I was glad to be able to see it.
Yeah. It's
I'm jealous.
It's cool.
Honestly, I'm gonna be honest.
Cool. Well, if you're ever in Nashville, we'll head down to Gatlinburg, and we'll get you. I'm pretty sure they have like other designs now.
I'll hold you to it.
Yeah, man. Well, yeah. Well, thank you, Owen, for coming out and doing this, man. Let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely.
Maybe for part 2, when part 2 comes out, and then you'd make more theory videos, then we'll have this conversation again.
Sounds
or other games or whatever, man.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Whatever. Just hit me up. We'll see
dude.
what we can do.
Thank you so much. Yeah.